Says we're streaming. Are we good? We're good. Okay, great. All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our planning committee on November the 12th. And I'm going to welcome everybody in at 9:05 this morning. This is an electronic meeting being held in accordance with Section 238 of the Municipal Act 2001 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. I am verbally confirming that all of our councillors are present. I am confirming also that our CAO and our Director of DSES, I'm going to shorten it, thanks, and other senior staff members are here. And so the public input into the agenda was at planning@muskokalakes.ca. The following emails were received, and it is for item 4A, dark sky bylaw amendment proposal, Linda Taylor-Dow, Ross Poinez and Patricia Poinez and Wayne Gibson. So as we're getting used to this, all motions have been pre-populated to expedite the meeting, and voting will be done by council members raising their hand. If there's an issue with that, we will have a verbal vote, but it will not be counted as a registered or recorded vote. Today, we actually do have a supplementary agenda, and this is pursuant to section 7.2.1 of the council procedure. We are including a Mr. Tom Rennie, who will be able to speak to item 11A. Okay, so I think that's it for that part of it. And then disclosure of pecuniary interest. Anybody? Okay, I am disclosing that for item 11A, which involves the Muskoka Lakes Golf and Country Club, I am a member of that club, so I will be excluding myself from that discussion. And I see Councillor Jaglowitz, you have a question or a comment?
Oh, I also have a conflict. It's on 8A, and once again, it's a cell tower on Riverdale Road. I'm a member of the road committee, and there are some monies involved in that transaction, so I'll be not part of that discussion.
Barb is on mute. Barb is on mute.
Thank you, Phil. Sorry. All right, so we are now going to move on to our public meetings. The first one being OPA number 54. Well, no, sorry. We're going on to our delegations, and that would be for proposed bylaw amendment for the dark sky bylaw. And I believe we have Mr. Rapar here to speak. So before we get to that, I'm going to ask our Director of DSES to please just give us some history on this bylaw before we start talking about it. So if you wouldn't mind, Mr. Pink.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee, members of the public. The dark sky bylaw, or what is known as the dark sky bylaw, is actually a bylaw to regulate outdoor illumination. Was passed in 2014, obviously by a previous term of council. Just quickly looking at the recitals of that bylaw to give committee some background on the reasoning for its passage. The council today wished to prevent conflicts with abutting land uses and preserve privacy, prevent impacts on wildlife and hazards to navigation, and wish to preserve the night sky. The recitals go on to recognize the Torrance Barrens Dark Sky Reserve and recognize the municipality's responsibility to protect and enhance it, as well as valuing dark sky on a broader scale throughout the municipality as it contributes to our tourist economy and traditional Muskoka character. And council again deems it desirable to enact the bylaw with respect to dark sky preservation and improvement by regulating lighting fixtures so that they do not emit undesirable or unsafe light rays into the dark sky, and thus protect the dark sky environment and human health, both on our streets and on the water. The delegation, I believe you were about to hear, we did receive complaints about the lighting on a subject property. Our bylaw enforcement officer, Ms. Miners, is with us today. She has investigated and has been dealing with the property owner, and they wish to speak to committee regarding that bylaw and the situation at hand. I believe committee members are aware, I forwarded yesterday, we have received a number of emails from neighboring property owners. Happy to provide further details on those, but they were all forwarded to committee this week.
Thank you, Mr. Pink. Okay, Kelly, could we ask Mr. Rapar to, or whoever from their delegation would like to speak first? But I think one at a time is fine.
Hi, good morning, everyone, and thank you for your time. My wife, Maureen, was going to speak on behalf of our group. I'm not sure if she was admitted or not. I'm just trying to see if.
Oh, so Mr. Rapar, oh, okay, we can certainly let her in. We were just trying to figure out who we would let in first. So if you prefer her to speak, that's fine. We'll just let her come in now.
Okay, and there's two other folks and as part of our delegation, Steve McNair and Alex Brooks. Can all four of us be on? Is the technology allow that, or?
Yes, we can bring you all in at the same time.
Terrific, thank you very much.
Oh, who are we looking for?
Maureen McCaffrey.
Excuse me, Mr. Brooks, are you online? We're having trouble identifying you in the electronic. Can you raise your hand, your electronic hand? You see it, Kelly? Okay, we're having trouble locating Mr. Brooks, but we will carry on at this point. And as you speak, could you please just give your name and address? It's for the record, for our records before you speak. And I think Ms. McCaffrey, you are planning on going first?
Yes, am I in?
Yes, you are.
Yeah. Okay, great, thanks.
So please carry on.
Okay, great. Yes, as Mr. Pink indicated, this is a proposal to amend the dark sky bylaw to allow exterior light fixtures which project light upwards as long as the light is fully cut off by overhangs. And as he indicated, Ms. Miners was over at our place. She indicated that the Teagle 18-inch wall sconces that we have on the house are non-compliant. According to the manufacturer's spec sheet, it does indicate that they are dark sky compliant, but we can understand that there's some issue with the up light portion of it. Can we screen share, or can we get the photos up or the exhibits up from the agenda? Or does everyone have the proposal in front of them? You're on mute.
Sorry, I get used to this again. Everybody has this, and okay. This council is very good at doing all their research before we hit the meeting. So okay, I think great. We're good. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so if you look at Exhibit 1, which is the actual light fixture, which does indicate that it is dark sky compliant. That was from our designer who selected the fixture. But nevertheless, let's go to Exhibit 3. And that is a test that was done on the fixture and all the data that came with that test. And if you go to the page 5, actually page 6 of that document, it shows on the top left-hand corner the cone of light, which indicates how far the beam of light goes away from the fixture, and also how wide it is, and then how much the strength of it drops off. So if you go to Exhibit 4, we've done a diagram that shows the light fixture, which is in one of the instances 17 inches below the overhang. And based on that chart, at 2 feet above the fixture. The beam of light would be 1.4 feet wide, but since the fixture is 17 inches away from the overhang at that point, the beam is only 10 inches wide that projects onto the overhang, and that leaves 23 inches of overhang, which is actually still in the dark, and it completely blocks all of the light. I also want to point out on the bottom of that chart just how quickly the foot candles drop off as the light goes away from the fixture. And that's deemed as a longitudinal classification, which is very short. So you can see by 4 feet away from the fixture, it's already dropped off 75% in strength. And by 10 feet away, it's already dropped off to 96%. The next page on Exhibit 4.2 is actual photos of the light fixtures on the cottage. And you can see in the night photo where that overhang is and how the light has been blocked completely by the overhang. The next page is actually where I've shown the overhangs on the house range from 11 inches to up to 5 feet. So I showed the worst case scenario under this one, which is a light that's the farthest away on the shortest overhang. And you can still see that based on that cone, we can dim the lights down enough so that the overhang completely blocks any light that comes across. So that's basically the house. We have 13 of those light fixtures. 5 of them are actually over complete roof. So they're under covered porches that are completely roof. And then there are 8 of them that are under overhangs. And I showed kind of like the best scenario to the worst case scenario with those 2 diagrams. So we are requesting that there's an amendment to that bylaw to allow these light fixtures, which completely block all the light and meet the intent of the dark sky bylaw, to be able to be allowed.
Okay, thank you. As Mr. Repart, are you wishing to speak?
No, I only actually, I just want to point out, you asked for the official address just for the record, and it's 1107 Roberts Bay Road in McTier, Ontario.
Thank you very much for
But no,
that.
nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else from your group wish to speak?
Steve, any other comments? Were there other comments from you, Steve, on this? I'm not sure if Steve got on. Steve McNair.
I don't think I have any other
There's
real
Steve.
comments. One thing that I might want to point out would be the fact that maybe to bring in consideration of soffits or overhangs to be considered shade. I guess that's sort of one direction that I would kind of like to point everybody's attention to. Some of the architectural design of this building will operate as a shade, and I think that's what Maureen's nicely kind of dictated with her drawings. So yeah, I'd like to see what the thoughts are on that.
Thank you, Steve.
Okay, thank you. So let me just try to get clear what you're looking for: an amendment to allow the lights that you have now to remain. That is basically what it is.
That's basically what we're looking for, yeah.
Okay, I do have one point of clarification. I know you said that these lights are dark sky compliant, but it's my understanding there are 2 versions of this light. One of them allows light up and one of them doesn't. And
That's
the one
correct.
that doesn't is the one that's dark
Yeah,
sky
it's just
compliant.
not clear on their specs. They just, I mean, it's
Right.
one spec sheet that says dark sky compliant, but you know,
That's
we
okay.
get that the uplight probably is not dark sky compliant based on your definition in the bylaw.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that for everybody. So, okay, thank you. And Kelly, do we have anybody here who would like to speak? Okay, so council, committee, any questions, any comments? Councillor Hayes.
Okay, just a little bit of background. The dark sky bylaw took over a year to develop. It was a combination of staff and councillors and the public. Because we knew it would affect everyone, it was not taken lightly, excuse the pun. And because it affected everybody, we made sure that the bylaw was very explicit as to what was dark sky compliant and what was not and we did that by including pictures. They're on page 8 of the bylaw. And we've requested a full cutoff or something being fully shielded. And although I appreciate your report being fulsome, it does anything going up towards the sky does pollute the night sky. Even so, you say it's shielded. It's not shielded by the overhang. So because the intent of the dark sky bylaw is to protect the sky and the circadian rhythm of nature, I would not be supporting a change in the dark sky bylaw. Thank you.
Are we allowed to, can we just clarify what we're actually asking for so that, just to make sure we're clear? Because just based on the councillor's comment, just to.
So, well, Mr. Ripar, at the moment, there is no lighting allowed to go up. You're asking that there will be some lighting allowed to go up.
Only in a case where it's completely, just to mention what the councillor said, only if it gets completely cut off by the overhang. We are not suggesting, recommending, or asking for any light to be projecting up into the sky. We're actually asking only if it is completely cut off by the overhangs. Okay. Just so that we're clear.
Thank you. I think that's clear. Thank you. Councillor Nishikawa.
Sorry, I also will not be supporting this. An 11-inch overhang is not much of an overhang, in my opinion. I very successfully have been involved in dark sky lighting throughout a whole, properties, and there is no exception in my mind. So I would not be approving this today. There's also we discussed the lights, but it also is what else is surrounding it. Is there a bunch of white aluminum, for instance? Lots of issues.
Completely dark.
Oh, sorry, I'm speaking.
Excuse no, Councillor Nishikawa, excuse me, but we are at the point now when the councillors ask questions, you can answer, but due to our protocols and procedures, either raise your hand or you must wait until you're asked a question so that we don't have this back and forth. It's all very procedurally oriented. Sorry. Okay, go ahead, Councillor Nishikawa. Are you okay, Councillor Jaglowitz? Can't hear you.
Oh, sorry.
There you go. There you go.
Sorry, I did not hear you comment. Thank you, Chair, through you. A couple of things. As we talk about dark sky, I am in possession, as is all of council, a photograph from Mr. Wayne Gibson. And again, I think that probably a part of this whole thing in front of us today is some people out in the public are very concerned. This is a particularly well-lit property. I would use the term well-lit. I wrestle with this one, and certainly I wonder if I could speak with or through Rachel, our the bylaw enforcement officer, in terms of your experience with this particular property. Is there public hue and cry? I mean, I've had a few emails as a councillor about it. Perhaps the folks that own the place aren't aware of it, but there is some concern, and I wonder if you could share that, Rachel, at least experiential. What's your what's your involvement been with this particular property? Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Miners, I think you can keep your comments to, we're talking about the dark sky lights, and that's what we're discussing. So go ahead, please.
So in terms of the dark sky lights, I think the main concerns were that it is a fairly lit property and that anybody on the lake or in that area can see how lit up it is. So I think that's just what the main concerns are from members of the public.
Okay, Councillor Jaglowitz, would you like, you're good? Councillor Edwards?
Yes, thank you. It's very, very unfortunate this has happened because, you know, you can always phone the building department and check things out. And that's, I wish architects and that contractors would save us this. I can't support this. Our bylaw is very, very clear. Had it been checked, it would have been light down only. And that's why I will not be supporting this.
Thank you. Mayor Harding?
Thank you. And when I first heard about this, whatever, a month or so ago, I understand your exhibit 4 that talks about 2 feet and it shines 1 foot. Yes, that overhang theoretically appears to be dark sky compliant. You're using the overhang as the cutoff fixture. I don't believe, and I'll ask staff a question, if we actually, you know, if the cutoff is 2 inches above the fixture or 4 inches or 2 feet, what qualifies? Technically, I think it has to be incorporated into the fixture. I understand your argument that if the overhang is fully cutting it off. However, I have to say, when you go to your exhibit 5, talk about 4 feet when the light's only at 40%, it's not a protracted beam, it's just 40%. And, you know, even in your diagram, it doesn't start at 1/4 of an inch wide. The light bulb is probably 2 inches wide. It's certainly just going to illuminate around that eaves at 11% or 11 inches out. And we can't rely on someone to turn their lights down and only up to 40% to allow the illumination. So I think our dark sky bylaw has it right. The only question I do have to ask, though, is if a 1:5 ratio was in place, let me say, that a light fixture was 12 inches down to a 5-foot overhang, could the overhang be considered cut off at that point? Because there's not a chance any light could get around it. I know our bylaw says no. This particular, again, when you look at the percentage, and if a light fixture is 4 feet down the wall, there's not a chance that can be fully cut off. And I certainly don't agree with that. But, you know, just from a definition perspective, again, if that light is 2 inches underneath the eaves trough or underneath the overhang, there's no light going to get out. The eaves trough would be acting as an overhang. So I understand that argument, but I'll just look to staff, maybe Mr. Pink, whatever his definition or clarity. It's the actual fixture has to be, and not using another portion, correct?
Go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. That is correct. The bylaw doesn't differentiate. It has to be fully cut off, the fixture itself. My suggestion to committee, and this could be done perhaps in a future update to the bylaw, further to the discussion we had last month. We will be bringing bylaws forward for updates. I think rather than get into a technical debate about percentages and cones and distances, you know, of overhangs, perhaps what may be advantageous is a section in the bylaw that allows property owners to apply for actual amendments to the bylaw, similar to a minor variance. And a committee of adjustment can review those on a case-by-case basis. Property owners can put their comments in, neighbors could comment, and relief be granted. Currently, the dark sky bylaw has a similar clause, but it's only for temporary exemptions, which I don't believe the property owners are looking. I think they would prefer this to be a permanent exemption. So I think, again, rather than a technical debate here about what's an appropriate distance of an overhang and the length of width of an overhang, etc., is perhaps an amendment or variance type process in the bylaw.
Thank you. Councillor Jaglowitz?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Through you, I have a question for the applicants or delegates. It's a two-part, so I'll ask both parts. I understand there are two versions of this fixture. One is dark sky compliant and is the top covered. And I'm trying to understand why you chose this fixture and what the purpose is of having light shining up to an overhang. And the second part of the question is, since there's two versions, can these be easily modified to be compliant, and would that not just solve the problem?
So would either Ms. McCaffrey or Mr. Rapar? Oh, I see Mr. McNair would like to answer that. Mr. McNair?
I do believe that you can order this fixture with it just shining downwards. I guess the intent drawn in by the architect and lighting designer that was specified for this job, he wanted to illuminate the soffit in a way that you didn't have direct light shining downwards to distract the eye. Now, that being said, I think that some thought should go towards the dark sky bylaw in a couple different areas. If you're on the water and you're looking at a cottage from the lake, you're getting direct glare from whatever lighting fixture is going to be in the soffit. That could be easily considered obtrusive to someone navigating the lake. Whereas I feel the lighting design of this property, if properly set up with some dimming, is far less obtrusive than some places that you see when you're navigating the lake. To your point, Councillor, about the building inspectors looking at items such as this, there was lots of trips out to the site with the building inspector. Oftentimes, there isn't a nice harmonization between the electrical trade and the building inspector because we are governed by a different inspection authorization ESA. So that needs to be considered. It'd be nice to find some harmony with that. And it would be great to see the building inspector engage a little bit on this particular bylaw because this could have been prevented. So yeah, it's kind of my point.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McNair. I am going to ask committee because we have a suggestion from our director that perhaps we want to have a look at this going forward to amend it from just temporary exclusions from this bylaw. I am not in favor of that. I think the bylaw stands for itself. There is a temporary ability to have this bypassed. I personally am not interested in this, but I'm going to ask for committee's nod of heads on, do we want to even consider amending this bylaw? And I am seeing no. So do I need to read this so that it goes? Oh, I don't have anything. There's no motion. So we have that recorded. So, okay. So I think that we are not going to review the bylaw. That is the decision of our planning committee. It will be the recommendation that goes to council next month. Moving on from there, we have Maria Wood. Oh, yeah, can you move them out? Okay, we're having technical time here for a second. The next one is our the Can Acre agent for the Joseph River cell tower. Sorry. Oh. Yes, Councillor Jaglowitz, I believe you have to turn your screen off.
So do I have to, for this presentation and for the, will you then deal with that matter so I can come back in, or what's the plan?
Yes, I'm going to deal with it all at once. It just makes more sense to me. If she's doing her presentation, we'll do that, and then you can come back in afterwards.
Thank you.
Welcome, Ms. Wood.
Good morning, Mayor Harding, councillors, staff, and members of the public in attendance. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. I'm Maria Wood of Can Acre, 49 Queen Street East in Toronto, and I'm the planner here on behalf of Bell Mobility. I'll be speaking on Bell's behalf regarding the Joseph River W7705 monopine proposal. I do have a presentation that I submitted. I'm not sure if you want to bring it up on screen or if you can just follow along as I speak.
I believe that we all have our documents in front of us, so I think you can just carry on.
Sure. So to go through the agenda quickly, I'll first go over the project summary and objectives, tower design and site locations, including the technical aspects. I will then discuss consultation process and finally the request for concurrence, as we do believe that Bell has fulfilled the concurrence requirements as per township policy. So to start, Bell Mobility is committed to improving wireless network coverage and capacity for businesses and residents in the Muskoka area. And the structure will provide drastically improved network coverage and capacity for the community. As noted, the tower type will be a monopine, and these structures are disguised as a pine tree and are meant to minimize the visual impact to your cottage communities and rural areas. This monopine will be 29.9 meters in height and will host both the cellular network and high-speed wireless internet to the home services, with upload and download speeds that are expected to vary per location, but generally will be up to 50 megabits per second download and up to 10 megabits per second upload. Our next two slides will show the proposed location and alternatives. So the current proposed location is best suited in between the two water bodies that you see on the slides. And this location will provide service for the most residents while minimizing visual impact to the community. Many other sites were considered, but were found to either be less suited for radio frequency or would have a larger visual impact to the community. And we have not received any objections in regards to this location. That being said, this is just further evidence that this is the right site for the monopine within the community. And we have also completed a Transport Canada assessment, and the entity has confirmed that no daytime lighting, nighttime lighting, or marking will be required for the current proposed location. Next, we have our visual simulations, and these are taken from Riverdale Road. The first is just west of the site, and you can see that the foliage is a little thicker in the upper photo where the monopine is located, but other than that, it blends into the surroundings quite well. And this is the same in the second visual simulation that looks directly onto the site. And finally, the two consultations were completed for this proposal. During the first consultation, the landowners expressed their interest in telecommunication improvements, but were against the proposed location of the monopine. So Bell considered other location options based on the feedback and relocated the monopine to a location that was actually proposed by the public during the consultation. So when starting the second consultation with this new proposed location, we felt that an increased consultation radius and timeline would be appropriate for this location. And we expanded the radius to include 4 additional landowners who were just outside of the consultation radius, as well as participants from the first consultation. And we also increased the consultation period from 30 to 45 days to ensure that all those who wish to comment could do so. And we are pleased to announce that we received no objections to the newly proposed location or to the revised proposal in general. And finally, to conclude, Bell is committed to improving the wireless network in the Muskoka area, and we are excited to bring the proposals to this community. The proposed site implements significant wireless network improvements to the local community through mobile LTE network coverage and capacity and the wireless internet. Bell Mobility did go above and beyond normal consultation requirements to ensure that landowners were notified and invited to comment on these proposals. And Bell Mobility thanks the Township of Muskoka Lakes and the community for their input and collaboration to bring these better services to the community. So at this time, Bell Mobility is officially requesting the council deliver a letter of concurrence for the Joseph River W7705 monopine proposal.
Thank you, Ms. Wood. Committee, any questions, comments? Seeing none, I will, seeing one, seeing two actually. Councillor Jaglowitz. You're on mute, Councillor Jaglowitz.
Yes, I am. I'll learn. I have no problem with this. I just have a question for Maria, and that is there a fair and equitable, it's a bizarre question, framing, I suppose, but is there a fair and equitable distribution of bell towers throughout the township of Muskoka Lakes? And I see here on your presentation, there's quite a concentration where this is proposed, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 towers, right? Within an area, can 1 through 5. Would you suggest, just, and this is offside, I suppose, but is there a fair and equitable distribution of cell towers, either existing or proposed by your company? I would appreciate that insight. Thank you.
Sure.
Ms. Wood?
So when we do propose a new monopine, a new tower, anywhere within the community, what we're seeing is a need for a new tower, either because there is the existing towers are over capacity, which means that there's too many people in the area that are using the existing towers, or that there's lacking coverage, which means that there aren't enough towers in the area. So when you see a proposal where there are other existing towers in the area, it's because generally the population and the users in that area are higher. So it might look like on a map that there is clusters of towers in some areas and others there aren't. This is usually based on the user population.
Oh, Director Pink would like to add to that.
Perhaps I'm off base, but perhaps if I can through the chair. Maria, I believe the presentation or the page Councillor Jaglowitz was referring to, page 25 in the agenda package, those are proposed alternate locations of the subject tower. So Bell identified potential options for towers. The yellow ones were alternatives that were not seen to work based on either neighbors' comments or topography. And ultimately, the green pin can 4 was the chosen proposed site. So there is not a cluster of towers in that area. Those are alternate sites. I believe I'm correct, Maria.
Yes, that's correct. If you are looking at the image with the green tower and the yellow ones around it, the yellow towers are, or the yellow locations are other locations that we considered for this monopine, but due to the elements, location, elevation and such, those locations weren't viable for this proposal.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Councillor Edwards.
Yes, thank you. I don't have a problem with it, just a question. Over the past few years, we've had complaints about the tower shedding, and it's plastic. Have they fixed that? That's question one. And the second one is I drive along Brackenridge Road. There's 2 towers there that are mono, and they also it looks like somebody's added a dish to it, or some of the branches have fallen off, because you can see it. And I don't know if it's your tower or Rogers, but if you could answer that, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, Ms. Wood.
Thank you. To address the pine needles that sometimes fall off of the monopines, the monopine structures, they are designed to take a lot of abuse from snow and wind and the elements. And unfortunately, Muskoka Lakes does receive a bit more weather than some other areas in the province. And the monopines are designed to be as strong as possible, but unfortunately, as you've noted, sometimes the needles do fall off. It has been flagged with Bell and the technicians to note if there is, a certain amount of needles falling off of the monopines, that it will be brought up. But right now, the needles, they don't pose a threat to the environment if that is a concern. And if there is a significant amount that do fall off, it will be brought up with the team. And then if you could repeat which tower you were discussing, the second question.
Yes, I don't have a number, of course, for it, but it's the one on Brackenridge Road. It's coming from Port Carling towards Windermere. There's 2 towers there. I think one's maybe Rogers and one's yours, and I don't know which one. But coming from Port Carling towards it, you can notice metal up there now, which I never noticed before.
That's definitely something that I can bring back to the project team. It's not something that has been brought up to me before, but we can bring it back and see if there is an issue that we can fix there.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Not seeing any more questions or comments, I'm going to read the motion. Moved by Councillor Zavitz, seconded by Councillor Mazan. Be it resolved, the Planning Committee recommend to Council that a support resolution / letter of concurrence be provided for proposed Bell Mobility Telecommunication Tower CT-03/20 W7705, and a copy be forwarded to Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada. Any comments? All in favor? Madam Clerk? Yes. Okay, that carries. Thank you, Ms. Wood.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we are going to continue now with our public meetings, and the first one on our agenda, excuse me, is Linda Taylor-Dow, I think, and Mr. Sharp, I believe that you are up.
Thank you, Chair Bridgeman. Good morning, members of Planning Committee, applicants and agents, and members of the public. The first applications to be heard are Official Plan Amendment 54 and Zoning Bylaw Amendment Application ZBA-22/20 in the name of Lateo. The applications have been submitted concurrently. The subject land is known municipally as 1143 Torrance Road. I would direct committee's attention to the submitted site plan on page 51 of the agenda package. The purpose and effect of the applications is summarized as follows. The purpose, an existing dwelling and garage were enlarged in the absence of building permits and do not comply with permitted lot coverage and height requirements. A dock is also being constructed in the absence of a building permit and does not comply with the cumulative shoreline structure width requirement. The purpose of the proposed official plan amendment and bylaw is to permit a lot coverage on the property that exceeds 1/10 of the permitted lot coverage, or 8.8%. The as-built lot coverage is 13.6% on the entire lot and 15.9% within 200 feet from the high water mark. The purpose of the proposed bylaw is also to permit an exemption from the maximum accessory building height requirement of 20 feet. The as-built garage is 23.5 feet in height. The purpose of the proposed bylaw is also to permit an exemption from the maximum cumulative dock width requirement of 15.5 feet. The as-built dock is 20 feet in width. Notice of this public hearing under the Planning Act, or meeting rather, was circulated 20 days in advance, and 18 submissions have been received to date. The first submission is by the District Municipality of Muskoka's Planning and Economic Development Department. In summary, should Council consider the redevelopment appropriate, district staff would not be opposed to the approval of the applications, provided that on-site phosphorus management and impact mitigation measures are implemented, and that is signed by Cassidy Fior, District Planner. The second submission is by Neil Donald, the Township's Chief Building Official, and Mr. Donald has no Ontario Building Code objections. The third submission is by the Township's Public Works Department, and the department has no objections. And the remaining submissions are brief letters of support signed by both immediate neighbors, Tim Britnell and Irene Murphy on either side of the property, and also by 13 other area landowners. I have prepared a detailed report for committee's consideration. The circulated public notice identifies a proposed exemption from front yard requirements. It has been since determined that the as-built dwelling complies with front yard requirements, and the circulated exemption is not required. As detailed in our report, staff are opposed to the proposed official plan amendment. Staff are also opposed to the proposed zoning bylaw amendment, save for and except the exemption from the maximum accessory building height requirement. I have no further comments at this time, and I would be happy to answer any questions from committee or the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sharp. Kelly, we have on behalf of this application, who's coming? Is Stefan, Mr. Zerback? All right. Mr. Zerback, you like to speak?
Good morning, members of committee. I hope everybody can hear me and see me. Thank you. Stefan Zerback, planner with Planscape, 104 Kimberley Avenue in Bracebridge, P1L 1C6. Again, good morning to all. I'm here today with the owners, Tony and Jen Lateo, the owners of the property. The Lateos would also like to address the committee after my presentation. Thank you to Bryce for the introduction. Again, just to reiterate, the purpose of the applications before you are to recognize existing development on the subject property. It's fully acknowledged that the work was completed without the benefit of a building permit. It was completed by the previous owners and was constructed approximately 10 years ago. It's important to note that there are no additional development proposals or reconstruction proposed as part of this request. I'd like to just start off also by saying it's important to describe the property as a legally existing, developed and undersized lot. When you look at the staff report, it's very clear that there are many lots on Black Lake that are considered medium-sized properties. There's approximately 50 developed lots, all have frontage approximately 100 feet along the water, and many of these properties are well under an acre in size. The lake essentially contains many small lots, and this forms the character of this lake and the surrounding neighborhood, including the nearby community of Torrance. This whole area, when you zoom out, including the lots along Clear Lake and the lots within the community of Torrance, are all comprised of historical small lots. I appreciate staff's comments and respect their comments in the report that although this property is found within the waterfront designation of the OP, and that there are very different policy directions for waterfront properties compared to rural or community policies, our only point to the committee today is just to take a snapshot, an overhead look of the immediate area, and just to show that it forms a specific character of this lake surrounding area. And it's obvious that many lots in the area are of similar size and are smaller than usual. The point I would like to suggest to the committee is that this is a very unique area to the township. It forms a very distinct and different character when compared to other areas throughout the municipality. Looking at the amendment itself, the numbers at face value appear to be large. I agree. In reality, the visual impact, the size of the dwelling and garage are not significant, nor are they out of character when looking at the existing development found on Black Lake. Just to take a step back, it's also important to know that the planners here at Planscape completely respect and acknowledge the current official plan policy to limit lot coverage to 1/10 of the permitted coverage to avoid overbuilding lots. The planners here are very cautious when we advise our clients with respect to consideration of lot coverage to ensure that it doesn't exceed 11%. In fact, we have on numerous occasions refused to represent individuals who want to exceed this limit. We are also very cautious as professional planners not to be seen as advocating for our clients, and we take extreme care when reviewing these types of planning requests solely on the basis of official plan policies. The planning process allows individuals to submit applications, and in this case, specifically an official plan amendment, when the general policy does not fit an individual lot or a unique situation. In my mind, this is one of those situations. I've read the staff report, and the owners and ourselves fully anticipated staff's response. We respect their opinions, and the staff were completely open and honest with the owners in discussing the possible outcomes. This is not a surprise to anybody. So to focus the attention on the planning perspective, just briefly, the official plan generally speaks to providing a balance among competing factors such as economic interest, social interest, environmental, and endeavors to maintain a strong sense of community. There are many policies that apply in these instances. So to touch on the environment, there are no known features or natural functions that have been impacted from this development. The shoreline is not landscaped. It features a natural rock face with native low-growing shrubs and plants. The majority of the property is well vegetated. There are thick natural buffers along the side and the rear of the property. From an economic perspective, the current owners have moved up here full time. They have a young family, and they're obviously going to be contributing to the local economy year round within the community of Torrance. Touching on ensuring that there's a strong sense of community, when considering that this development hasn't been in place for over 10 years, the surrounding community has accepted this property for what it is. In fact, with the clear number of overwhelming support for this application, with the letters that were submitted to the committee today, all of the directly adjacent owners along Torrance Road fully support this request. They completely understand the situation at hand, and they're very sympathetic to the situation that the family has inherited here. Other key official plan policies speak to ensuring the development can fit on the land, especially when considering this is an undersized lot. This is clearly the case, as this development has existed for over 10 years with no issues, no complaints from the surrounding community. The development doesn't encroach on any of the side yards, the rear yards. There's a large amount of natural vegetation, and there's already an operational septic system that exists on the property. While the owners had agreed to submit an official plan amendment to recognize the existing coverage, one particular policy it's important to note is B96B of the official plan. And the official plan basically states that for a variation to recognize coverage of existing structure, it basically states that no official plan amendment is required for a variation to recognize coverage of existing structures. As this structure is over 10 years old, council could qualify this development as existing and consider supporting the official plan amendment by simply freezing all development to what currently exists today. Again, it is understood that the requested increase to lot coverage is numerically substantial. However, it is our opinion that that it is appropriate given the uniqueness of the situation and the fact that this development is not only in keeping with, but part of the existing character of this area for many years. In our minds, it conforms to the overall policy direction, hence the reason why there's an official plan amendment to ensure that the policies can be considered on a site-specific basis. And we have submitted a planning analysis to support our recommendation. Just to touch on some of the specific details of the lot, the bulk of the dwelling addition is located beyond the 50-foot setback. The garage, which contributes 4.3% to total lot coverage, within 200 feet of the shoreline, is entirely screened from viewing the property from the lake and the road. And again, noting that there's quite a substantial amount of thick vegetation on this property. The dock itself is not considered coverage. It does not dominate the shoreline. Finally, it's my opinion that the overall application would not set any precedences in this situation. It is specifically permitted for this lot, and hence the reason for the site-specific official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment. So just to take a step away from the planning analysis and our professional recommendation, this is just more for information purposes only. And it's important to remind the committee that the owners purchased the property in 2019, and they unknowingly inherited 3 separate orders to comply issued by the building department. It was understood that prior to purchasing the property, their lawyer did the appropriate due diligence, asked the township if there were any outstanding building permit or orders, and the township said there was not, obviously because there were no building permits submitted or issued for this development. The sale then proceeded, and the owners unknowingly walked into this situation. Although they are investigating a claim against the title insurers, this is posing to be also a difficult task. And it was more important for the Lateos to attempt to remedy the order first and foremost as soon as possible and submit this planning request. So from an implementation perspective, if council is willing to consider this application, they are more than willing to submit a site plan control application. They're more than willing to retain the services of a landscape architect to ensure that if there are any areas to be replanted along the rocky shoreline, that they can be planted accordingly. So Again, I'd like to thank committee for your time this morning. I'm available for questions and happy to consider alternatives if it's the desire of the committee to help the Lateos out in this unfortunate situation. Again, the family would also like to address the committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefan. Okay, so I believe we're just bringing in the Lateos. Okay, welcome. Could you please state your name and address just for the record, and then please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Jen. My full name is Genevieve Lateo Antonio Lateo from 1143 Torrance Road, Torrance, Ontario P0C1M0. Hi, everyone. Good morning.
Okay, please go ahead.
Okay. Sorry, we moved from Niagara, and before we moved there, we understand the appropriate measure that it takes to make everything to code, get permits, and follow the rules. From when we lived in Niagara, we got permits for building a new kitchen. We got a permit to build our septic tank. We did everything according to the town. After we decided to move to Muskoka to live a great life here, as me and my husband enjoy it. Before we had kids, we used to love coming here to kayak on the Muskoka Lakes. We had decided last year to move here. So I was pregnant with my daughter. I quit my job. I wanted to live here full time. Before we moved here, I purchased this home, and we asked, before we purchased this home, we wanted to make sure if there were any permits done to the house. My lawyer and the previous owner's lawyer said that there was no
permit issues as it came back.
There were no permit issues as everything came back clean. We even asked if there were any additions done to this home, and we have it on email that they said that there are no additions to this home. And so we said, okay, let's seal the deal and get this home. And then when we physically moved here into the home, we found a paper with orders that's saying that 80% of our home was added without permits. And so that's where, we called our lawyer and the signers, and we spoke to Planscape to ask to get to help us with the situation, if they can get us to get the permits so we can make this right. Because we put all our money into this home. It's all we have, and we don't want to devalue this home and lose our money. And this year we found out my son's diagnosed with autism, and he doesn't talk, so that's a big burden for us as well. I know we understand that we have to do everything right, and we have to listen to you guys, but my son's going to cost $80,000 a year, and I don't want to lose this home. And if ever we have to sell it, I don't want to devalue the home. I love this place and I want to stay here. And I hope you guys understand that we'll do anything you want us to do properly, and if we can work something out. I don't have anything else to say.
Thank you. It's a very sad situation, and I think we all of us will agree it's really, really tough. So I am not going to make any comments right now, but is there anyone else who would like to speak in favor of this, Kelly? No. Is there anyone who would like to speak who is opposed? No. So, all right, then I think we're going to turn it over to council, to committee now. Committee, comments, questions? Councillor Jaglowitz.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. That's very emotional. And, you know, we're not to, you know, we're just to deal with the facts. And I guess the facts are in front of us. I think Stefan did an excellent job of setting the table. I spent an hour on the phone with these fine people last night. Wow. Drove over this morning and looked around. It is very unfortunate. And, you know, I'm torn because certainly I can understand the neighbors all saying, yeah, no problem, chiming in a positive sense, because then, you know, unfortunately, it allows them to come forward and say, well, listen, they let them have 12% or 15% coverage. I'd like to build a boathouse, or sorry, a garage or whatever. So I know that those pressures play on our minds. I think the notion that this is the age of the non-building code construction, I'm wondering, is something that we should be looking at. And you know, that's where I suppose through you, Chair, to David, are there compelling reasons for or against something that's been built not to code, not without permits, presumably not to code, because we don't have the permits, that is of this age, that is 10 to 12 years. I understand it, 08 and 11. Does that stand for anything in terms of our decision making here today? Thank you.
Director Pink.
Through the chair, thank you. You know, I certainly appreciate you know, the difficult situation the property owner finds them in, and the difficult decision committee and council has before them. I think the only thing I can say, I guess on one hand, the fact that a structure has been there for 10 years and the community seems to support it, I suppose committee could put some weight to the fact that it clearly didn't create any undue impacts in the area. With that said, I think I can only say as a planner, we have to view it as if it did not exist. It's not lawful. And we're analyzing the appropriateness of it as if it was proposed on a vacant lot. And staff, unfortunately, given the official plan policies, are not able to support it on that basis.
Thank you. Councillor Nishikawa.
Thank you. Much along the same lines as I look forward to meeting the new neighbors to the community. The concerns are, and when I spoke with others in the neighborhood, absolutely some comments came back that would be great if we could essentially add on umpteen more percent or whatever the percentage that they could do to their own properties. This is a really far stretch from saying that it's part of the community, and knowing, of course, that we don't have sewer and water to Torrance, for instance, and I think that we would be really stretching it to say that that's where the community has stretched out to. Essentially, it would be encompassing all of Black Lake. And there's lots of properties there, remembering that we have a very large children's camp on this lake as well. I can't support the official plan amendment. I'm concerned because I have, you know, in my 30 years being a neighbor on this lake, it's not been the healthiest of lakes, I will say. And now we have an algae bloom situation. I understand that some of that could be because of our temperature changes in the last couple of weeks. But I'm not the scientist. I would have to refer to the other members in my family to do that. But I haven't done that. I would say I would have a concern. Having said that, I did watch that garage get overhauled, I'll say. There were some complaints brought forward, but not, I recognize my capacity as a councillor is not necessarily to go around and filing complaints. My concern is that we would be inviting others to do the same on this, not this particular lake. It would be used as an example of where it could happen elsewhere. I have to say, and I want to ask David the question, I'm trying to wrap I know this is probably small in some people's minds, but the 20 by 20 dock, I've always, you know, we've talked around our council table for years actually about party docks and that sort of thing. I'm just wondering if I'm even looking at that wrong, and I'd look to David for comments on that.
Mr. Pink?
Thank you, committee. The official plan has a policy that does generally discourage large decks over water. The official plan envisions structures over water to be docks, which are used to access the lake for swimming and to moor a boat to, not for party decks. I think something that the new official plan, and certainly those discussions are already starting, as much as we discourage large decks over water, we as of right allow 75-foot wide, 66-foot long docks over water. So I think there's a mixed message going out to the community as to what the official plan wants to see and what we permit. So I do understand part of this proposal is a modest increase in width of dock size as well. And I think staff has noted that the applicable official plan policy that would discourage large decks over water.
If I may, Chair, continue on.
Continue on.
Sorry, thank you. I have a comfort level, and I'm not sure if it's, I actually think it's probably not appropriate, but I'm going to just put it out there anyhow. I have a comfort level with the existing structures on the property. I would like to see changes done to that 20 by 20 dock. But I would absolutely not want this to be, I don't know how to do it without being an official plan. Well, David, you mentioned it, but I didn't absorb it very well. I can't make a change to the official plan necessarily. I'm really concerned about what we're looking at in the future. We have a lot of negative things that have happened in the past on the lake that very fortunately our bylaw department has addressed. But I think it's also important to look at that dock, because it's a very small lake, and it's just a whole different animal in my opinion as well. So I don't know, David, help me out, I guess.
Mr. Pink?
We did not require an official plan amendment for the dock. A committee of adjustment regularly receives minor variance applications for slight increases in dock width, and we do consider those in conformity. With that said, if committee has a great concern with the dock, there is an official plan amendment before you. There could be policy language added to that amendment to address the size of the dock. Alternatively, if committee obviously is concerned with the dock, you can choose to refuse that aspect of the application. There are a number of requests before you, just so that committee is fully aware. You can obviously approve them entirely, you can defeat them entirely, but you can also approve portions of them if some are that you feel supportive of. So we can go into that type of detail, including the official plan amendment before you. The draft official plan amendment that Planscape has prepared predominantly addresses the increase in lot coverage. But again, we can add policy with respect to the dock width if that's a concern to council.
Thank you. Mayor Harding?
Thank you. And to Jen and Tony, first of all, my thoughts for your son, and also for being in this situation. One thing I would suggest that you have a conversation and go back to your agreement of purchase and sale with your realtor as to what was stated in that, what information they were to find out, and did something get missed, and you may have some claims on that. I'll park that decision for just a moment. I realize Councillor Nishikawa has commented about the dock width and change. I actually just pulled up, so the property, prior owners purchased that property in 2003, and there's a picture of that dock width existing in 2003. So it's been there for almost 20 years in that width. It used to have a boat slip in it, but the width and length would be the same. My question is to staff, and then I'll also where I'm going with this. David, my understanding is that in 2011, the Ontario Building Code changed, and we may need to have our CBO in here, but when buildings and structures were built prior to 2011, the building department had a year to find the issues and make rectify, otherwise they are now legal non-conforming. Post 2011, the building code changed that once we are made aware of the stuff, then we have a year to find it and make it rectify, or it is legal non-conforming. So if in fact this thing was actually built prior to 2011, it may be legal non-conforming, at which point I also wouldn't recommend a zoning amendment. I would just leave it as a legal non-conforming property and move forward at that particular. So my suggestion is, until we have some of that additional information, get a better handle of exactly when this property was built, I would defer this application today, would be my recommendation. And if we do find that Ontario Building Code did change specifically, and I believe that anything pre-2011, that's the data in the back of my mind, that this would just become legal non-conforming and we don't have any right to have it removed or changed. I'll leave that to you, or questions to you.
Sure.
Sorry, Mr. Pink.
Thank you, Chair, through you to the Mayor. Your understanding is generally correct. I don't have the date off the top of my mind as to when the building code, but I believe you're correct, is around 2010, 2011. And again, I'm not, Mr. Sharp maybe wish to expand on the history that we're aware of when these structures were built. But you are correct. Prior to that change in the Ontario Building Code, the municipality had 1 year from the date of construction in order to take action. Since that time, the building code has changed, and we have 1 year from the date we became aware of the issue. The building department, I believe, had previous legal advice and opinion that if a structure was built prior to those building code changes, that timeline would stay in place. We wouldn't be able to take action on a structure built, say, in 1999 that we just became aware of in 2020. With that said, I don't know if that necessarily means it's legal non-conforming. It just means the municipality can't lay charges under the building code. It certainly does not issue a building permit. It doesn't bring the property into compliance with the zoning bylaw. I think what you're wavering into, and if that is the direction, staff can pursue it. I think we would need a legal opinion as to whether that means the structure is lawful or not. Again, there's a bit of a technical situation with those changes to the building code. Perhaps a legal opinion could clarify, because I've heard both camps. Doesn't make it legal. On the other hand, I've heard some lawyers argue if the municipality can't pursue it, then how is it illegal? So I think there's a bit of a legal debate there, and we could get some advice if the committee wishes.
Thank you. Councillor Jaglowitz?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, my comments are taking the information I received today at face value. And so I'm supporting Mayor Harding's request for a deferral. And what I'd like to hear back from staff either today or when it comes back is to explain to this committee how it is possible that there were outstanding work orders on this property, and that when the solicitors inquired as to anything outstanding, they got a clean report. And this is not to put blame on anyone, but just to understand what our role in this was, because at face value, it would appear that the previous owner committed a, I don't want to use a term in public, but was less than honest with the purchasers. And if we don't have it in our system, when we issue these orders, certainly there should be some notation on title or something to prevent these unfortunate things. So long and short, I would support a deferral.
Director Pig.
Thank you. In response to that question, just quickly looking at the file, and Mr. Sharp and Mr. Sherback may wish to expand at what happened after these dates. But looking in the file, the municipal record search that was prepared by the municipality that indicated no building code or work orders was signed on July 16th of 2019. Subsequent to that, the building department must have been made aware of an issue, and the orders to comply were issued on July 23rd of 2019. So the orders were not in place when the municipal record search were requested. I'm not aware whether the owners were aware of those orders prior to their closing, however. And again, Mr. Sherback or Mr. Sharp may be able to shed more light on those details.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Edwards.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, when Mr. Sherback said 11%, it's 8% on that small leak, and that which really makes it hard. I would say we should actually defer this. It would be nice if it was legal not conforming and just leave it at that. I have a real problem with going like that. But on the other hand, it's been there for 10 years. They have everyone on the lake basically supporting them. And, you know, this is a little bit different. When they bought the house, somebody else did the work. I think we've got to look at our system a little bit better in the future. That when orders to comply, it should be put in a file right on that so they don't slip through. And I've been saying for years, we should be going after the contractors that are doing all this work. They know they have to get permits and that, you know, I have heard, well, you know, you can't blame the contractors because somebody else would do it. No, I think this is the problem. I feel sorry for these people. I think to remedy it would cause more damage than leaving it there at this point. So I'm hoping that it's just legal non-conforming. If not, I might have to hold my nose and vote in support of it. But it's just the way it is. It's unfortunate. I think they have a legal case against the previous owners if the work order, the orders to comply were there, and they should take it to the full extent of the law. But that's up to them. But I would go for the actual deferral now. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to make it quite clear. None of us are offering any kind of legal comments. We're just voicing opinions, just to make that clear. So, Councillor Jaglowitz.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, I certainly support the comments of my committee peer, Councillor Edwards, and certainly the mayor. You know, legal non-conforming, certainly a deferment. I think I like the language. I like where I see this going. I think we're somewhat like-minded, and I would appreciate you know, going in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hayes. And then I'm going to, I believe I know which way we're going here, but Councillor Hayes, and then I think I'll wrap this up for now.
I was just going to say that I do agree with the deferment, and along the same lines as Mayor Harding, Councillor Edwards, and Councillor Jaglowitz. Thank you.
Okay, so just a nod of heads. We are going to have a deferment, and to the Lateos, I think we're all hoping that we can find a way to make this work for you. It appears to me that there are other avenues you could pursue, but we're going to bring this back, and we bring it back at the next planning meeting. Director Pig.
think staff will pursue some legal advice as to the true status of this. I'll be honest with you. The fact that the building department has placed orders on it leads me to believe they've investigated and feel they can pursue it and it's not legal. But we will dig into that a little deeper. I can't promise as to when we will gather that information. We'll try to bring the matter back as soon as reasonable, likely in a round or two.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to put this on deferment and it will come back to us once we have that completed. Staff has a chance to update us on that. So I guess it's just hold tight until we're back again. Okay, thank you, Mr. Zerback. We'll see you again, Lateos. Okay, bye. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So we're going to have am I hearing somebody? We're going to take a 5-minute break right now. I think this is a good time to do that. And 25 to 11, we'll be back. Okay, we have a lot of councillors' pictures only, so please come back on screen if you're around. Okay, ready, Madam Clerk?
1, 2, 5, 6, 7.
I think Ruth is there. She just popped on and popped off again. There she is. So we have quorum?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So are we live? Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, everybody. We're back. We're back again. And our next application is by Rossi. And again, Mr. Sharp, I believe you are up. And by the way, I know Mayor Hardy mentioned this yesterday, but for those who weren't at our council meeting, congratulations, Manager of Planning. Welcome to your new position. And you need to even change your video feed that says Planner 2 on it. So welcome, Mr. Sharp.
Thank you for the kind words, Chair Bridgeman. The next application to be heard is zoning bylaw amendment application ZBA-23/20 in the name of Rossi. The subject property is known municipally as 2788 Muskoka Road 169. I would direct committee's attention to the submitted site plan on page 92 of your agenda package. The purpose and effect of the application is summarized as follows. The subject property contains a single-story dwelling, a single-story sleeping cabin, and docks, and it has approximately 237 feet of lot frontage. Consent application B/43/19/ML was conditionally granted by the Committee of Adjustment in December 2019 to sever lands from an abutting lot and add them to the subject property. The lot frontage of the resultant lot in that application will be approximately 96 feet. Based on its configuration and straight line frontage, which is actually a reduction from what the property has today. The actual / assessed frontage of the resultant lot will equate to approximately 880 feet. The purpose of the proposed bylaw is to provide an exemption from the definition of lot coverage contained in the township's comprehensive zoning bylaw. The applicant proposes to deem the resultant lot in the consent application as having 300.9 feet of lot frontage. The applicant intends to finalize the consent application and construct a future boathouse in compliance with all applicable zoning requirements. The proposed bylaw will have the effect of deeming the resultant lot to have 300.9 feet of lot frontage, which will permit buildings to be constructed in the future in compliance with the township's zoning bylaw. Notice of this public meeting under the Planning Act was circulated 20 days in advance, and 6 submissions have been received to date. The first submission is by the District Municipality of Muskoka's Planning and Economic Development Department. In summary, district staff would not be opposed to the approval of the application, provided that the appropriate development control techniques are used to direct shoreline development outside of Type 1 fish habitat. That is signed by Cassidy Fiore, District Planner. The second submission is by Neil Donald, the Township's Chief Building Official, and Mr. Donald has no Ontario Building Code objections. The third submission is by the Township's Public Works Department, and the department has no objections. The fourth submission is by Jack Hutton, an area landowner who owns property 1 lot to the west of what will be the resultant lot. Following is a brief summary of Mr. Hutton's submission. Mr. Hutton provided a detailed description of the history of the subject property, which is known locally as Island Point. Mr. Hutton has concerns about the potential of a future 2-story boathouse. More specifically, his concerns appear to be centered on the impact of that type of building along the westerly frontage of the resultant lot, which is in view of his property. I would be happy to read the submission in full if directed to do so by committee. However, I understand that Mr. Hutton is here to speak to the matter today. The fifth submission is by John Hutton, who is Jack Hutton's son, and the submission is as follows. My family has owned the cottage mainland property across from the westerly side of Island Point since 1970. I spent my childhood summers there learning how to swim and to appreciate the nature around us. My thoughts are the changes in our part of the lake have slowly eroded the nature we came here for. The biggest impact I can see in this area is the noise that comes from a large boathouse / cottage on the Dark Lake side of Bala Bay, opposite the easterly side of Bala Bay. It worries me that something like this might be coming across the bay from us. I think that building a large boathouse across from us is turning the area even further from the nature that should be preserved as the most important part of Lake Muskoka. A structure of this size will be overwhelming for a small bay, the quiet families that occupy it, and the increasingly challenged nature that is used to occupy it. And again, that submission is by John Hutton. The 6th submission is by Chris Robinson, who is an immediate neighbor to the west. The following is a brief submission or a brief summary of that submission. Mr. Robinson emphasizes that the applicant has done a wonderful job of updating the subject property while maintaining its integrity. Mr. Robinson's concerns are centered on the potential of a 2-story boathouse along the westerly frontage of the property. Following approval of the proposed exemption, the frontage is in view of his property. Mr. Robinson believes that a 2-story boathouse along this frontage would have a profoundly negative effect on the enjoyment of the bay. He and other area landowners feel quite strongly that constructing a boathouse much beyond the size of what had been in place along that frontage for decades is not warranted or fair. Mr. Robinson notes that he has no objection to a 2-story boathouse being constructed on another part of the resultant lot. I would be happy to read the submission in full if directed to do so by committee. I have prepared a detailed planning report for committee's consideration. Staff would note that the approval of the application will permit a 2-story boathouse to be constructed on the resultant lot, as 300 feet of lot frontage is the minimum requirement for this type of shoreline structure. The westerly frontage of the resultant lot is in view of 2 abutting properties as defined by the extension of property lines over water. Township's official plan identifies that development shall have regard for compatibility of uses and where necessary shall have provisions to limit compatibility concerns. This is generally accomplished through the control of development envelopes, limiting built size, increasing setbacks, among other considerations. In preparing our report, staff felt that public input may be important, and as such have recommended that any public comments be received and considered by committee. I have no further comments to add at this time, and I would be happy to answer any questions from committee or the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sharp. Kelly, we have the applicant or applicant's agent here to speak. Yes, I do. Okay, we'll just be a minute bringing in whoever we're bringing in. Okay.
Good morning, members of council. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, could you please identify yourself and just your address too, please?
Certainly. My name is Graham Heisinga. I'm a land use planner at Wayne Simpson and Associates in Huntsville, Ontario, 76 King William Street, P1H1E4. I'm here on behalf of Connor Rossi and Fred Rossi, the owners of the property. I'd like to thank Bryce for preparing that thorough report. It explains the issue pretty well, I think. And also I'd like to echo the councillor's kudos to Bryce for the new position. That's wonderful, and I look forward to working with him in the future. Yeah, it's, related to the subject lands, the issue stems from a technical interpretation of frontage in the bylaw. Now, the zoning bylaw is, of course, not a perfect document that can control or dictate development in any circumstance. It can't anticipate every circumstance under which it's going to be applied, which is the reason why processes like this exist. So, as Bryce noted, the real world or lineal frontage of this peninsula lot is actually somewhere in the range of 880 square feet, or sorry, 880 linear feet. But the bylaw would dictate that this property, once the severance is finalized, would have a frontage of 96 feet, which wouldn't even qualify it to be a building lot. Now, obviously, that wasn't the intent of the lot addition application that we proceeded with last year, because we were looking to gain further development rights and rectify an existing land use issue, being the situation of the septic system for this peninsula lot on a separate property. Now, just to give you a bit of background that Bryce kind of touched on in the report, but I'll just flesh it out a little bit. We initially prepared and submitted a consent application for a small lot addition from the abutting lot to the southeast, I suppose you'd call it, which is also owned by the same family, the Rossies, to this peninsula lot, which is referred to as Island Point. And the intent of that lot addition was to secure a little bit of additional lot frontage per the definition of the bylaw, to eventually allow shoreline development under the rights that are granted for a lot with 300 feet of shoreline frontage. And we had arrived at a configuration that achieved that and achieved a frontage of 300.9 feet, which we've since confirmed with a survey. Now, in the course of securing the approval for the consent, we had discussions with staff, with planning, as well as with Sandy Boss, related to the existing septic system that services the dwelling on this Island Point property. The septic system has an existing Ministry of Environment approval since it was constructed on the abutting lot to service this peninsula lot. It's not on the same lot. Now, that would not allow the township's building department to have control over the septic permitting process, because the building code only contemplates septic systems that are on the same site that they serve. So in adding that little flag portion that runs down the side of the retained lot and encompasses the septic envelope for the peninsula lot, we've rectified this planning issue and given the township more control over the septic permitting process moving forward. The unfortunate consequence of that was that we added side lot lines to the peninsula property, which changed its bylaw frontage from what would have been 300.9 feet to 96 feet. So all we're doing here is a technical amendment to the definition of lot frontage to permit basically the real world frontage to be conveyed through the policy. So I'm happy to answer any questions about how we arrived at this point, and look forward to discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else care to speak for this application? We're good? All right. Anyone who is opposed to this, Kelly? Okay, it was just, we're just waiting a moment here. I gather we are letting in Mr. Pecuniary. Mr. Pecuniary, are you there?
Oh.
Could you turn your video on, please?
Is that working now?
Thank you. It is working and we can hear you. So just your address too, please, and please go ahead.
2798 Muskoka Road, 169.
Okay, so you're very hard to hear. Is your speaker up, or maybe you could lean closer?
We'll try both. 2798 Muskoka Road, 159.
Okay, you're going to have to speak really loudly because you're very hard to hear.
Yeah. 2798 Muskoka Road, 159.
Okay. Okay, please go ahead.
So we are almost directly across from the proposed boathouse, if it is going in the same location as the previous boathouse. The previous boathouse was built in early 1900s, 1920 or so. Jack Cutton will speak to the exact dates. It was removed and a dock was installed in the same position, slightly larger dock space, which fit into the little bay very well. We're speaking of a bay that is approximately 200 feet, probably less, 175 feet wide. So I could throw a baseball or toss you a beer from one dock to the other without any problem. We don't and all of the neighbors have talked about this, we don't have a problem with putting back a boathouse in the same location as long as it would be around the same size. A 2-story boathouse in this little tiny bay, which the entrance is basically a dead end, would be allowing a whole bunch more traffic, boat traffic, a lot more noise, and a lot more confusion in this tiny little bay, and it would not fit in with our existing surrounding. So again, we don't have an objection of a large boathouse on the opposite side of Island Point, but having a large boathouse at looking out at our small 4 or 5 cottage cul-de-sac, if you will, would not fit in at all.
Oh, okay, thank you. Kelly, anyone else? I think Mr. Hutton would like to speak too. Okay, whoever would like to speak, please put your electronic hand up. That's how we can identify to bring you into the meeting. Is that helping, Kelly? Yeah. It was so much easier in person, I have to tell you. It just was. Oh, there's Mr. Hutton. So we know he wants to speak. So here he is. So Mr. Hutton, if you could hear me, could you turn your video on and then you can unmute yourself? Mr. Hutton, are you there? You need to unmute yourself, Mr. Hutton. Can you unmute him, Kelly?
How's that?
Oh, good. Okay, here he is. Great. Would you like to put your video on?
Now the video one, I just not sure exactly where that is here.
Okay, well then let's just hear you. That sounds great.
Okay,
So,
fine.
please give us your address also, Mr. Hutton.
Yes. Okay, apologies. My name is Jack Hutton. Any glitches we have here, I must explain, are because I'm coming to you through my crystal radio. So if that is okay with you, can you hear me?
I'm sorry, you're coming to us from where?
Can you hear me better now?
Yes, I can. And that sounds great. So please don't forget your address.
Okay, fine. I'll attempt that again. My name is Jack Hutton, and my address, I guess to give the cottage one, is 2796 Muskoka Road. And apologies for the fact that I'm coming to you through my crystal radio this morning, which accounts for any problems you're having hearing me. So I would like to I'd like to invite you to imagine right now that you're looking at Island Point, and while we're talking, we're looking across the very narrow little bay at 4 cottages built in the 1920s, clapboard, 1 story, and we're now talking about putting a 2-story boathouse that will dwarf everything that is over there. And I think would be obvious if you can imagine that this is going to change everything there. I'd like to echo what both Glenn and Chris and his presentation have said. This is not a confrontation in any way at all. We are so impressed and thankful for what Mr. Rossi has done on the island. I think the owners, in selling it to him, assumed it was going to be a takedown. We certainly did. Instead, He rescued that 100-year-old cottage. He has restored it at his own expense, and I think extreme expense, so that it's going to last another half century at the least. And I think somewhere Muskoka Heritage or somebody should recognize that there should be a nod thanking him. So if we have concerns about the two-story boathouse, this is not meant as a confrontation. 2 days ago, I asked my cottage neighbors to give me a quick summary of their impressions. And if you don't mind, these are very brief. Starting off on the Torrance side, Chris Robinson. This boils down to one point. The bay is too small to sustain a larger structure than what has been there. His father, Doug Robinson, who's been there for 60 years. I agree. The size of the previous structure is totally unacceptable. If you want a two-story structure, it should be on the opposite side. My son, John Hutton, you've already read him, so I will not mention that. My daughter, Sue. The small, intimate bay where new owners are proposing to build a massive boathouse has been a quiet family haven for Muskoka families for 100 years. Treating our neighbors in the shoreline with respect has always been a given. A large two-story boathouse with a party deck will take us in the wrong direction. And my grandson, 12-year-old Kay Hutton Wakely, who, by the way, at the age of 12, he is just about to become one of the finest new jazz pianists in Toronto. I'm amazed. Here's Kai. This is a tiny little bay, and I have been coming here since I was born. A large boathouse with a play deck will make things bigger and louder. I don't like it. You've heard from Glenn Pecuniary. Pat Chambers, who's the next and the last cottage on our bay here. A boathouse the size of the previous one is acceptable, but anything larger just creates more problems. It is far too large for that little bay. Meanwhile, around the point, but we still consider him part of the family, Bob Broad, I agree with all the concerns of my cottage neighbors. So where does this take us? I think that the planner's report you have received has one sentence that boils the whole thing down. If you can hear me, could I ask you to take that planner's report, turn to page 9. Page 9 in the planner's report. So if you look down, get to the 6th line. At the end of the line, here is the sentence. Please listen carefully. The subject land also fronts onto Lake Muskoka, where larger built forms and building types are generally part of the character of the lake. I want to thank the author of that report. He probably didn't mean to say this, but what we've just heard tells us that the proposed two-story boathouse is in the category of, quote, larger built forms and building types that are found on Lake Muskoka. I hope you're observing or taking in what I'm saying, because what you have just heard supports the belief of our cottage group that the two-story boathouse belongs on the easterly side facing Lake Muskoka, not for a tiny bay where 12-year-old kids could play cats between one side and the other. So let me read that over again. The subject land fronts onto Lake Muskoka, where there should be boat face. Larger built forms and building types are part of the character of the lake. The boathouse belongs on the opposite side, not on the easterly side, facing 4 or 5 cottages that it is going to dwarf and change the whole ambience. So I think I'm only going to say one more thing, and that is that should you approve the recommendation that you're getting from, I heard 3 or 4 sources there, that when the application is actually made to build it, whether that's 1 year, 2 years, or whatever, that we will be allowed once again to voice an opinion. I realize I'm asking you to behave like Solomon's. I listened with great sympathy for you to the earlier very sensitive case. I don't think this is sensitive, but you have a choice of deciding whether we stay in the land of Henry David Thoreau and what Muskoka is all about, or whether we go a new direction with a boathouse that frankly does not belong there. So I hope I'm under my 5 minutes, Madam Chair, and thank you for hearing us. And I'd like to thank Bryce Sharp particularly for involving us in this. And I'd like to say hello to Alan Edwards, who
now you are running
December we met. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hutton. And I think your grandson should hire you as his marketing manager, to be quite truthful.
Oh, he is fantastic.
Yeah, sure he is. Kelly, anybody else? Nobody with their hands up? Okay, so could I just want to ask one question. I know we've got a number of people. Yes, certainly, Mr. Huizinga, you have the chance to respond. And I guess my question would be, is there any appetite from your client to agree to put that boathouse out in the main part of the lake?
Through you, Madam Chair, I just want to clarify that there hasn't been a proposal put forward yet. I'm not saying it's not going to happen that a 2-story boathouse will be in the Western Bay. I'm just saying we have no design, we have no idea of what size it's going to be, what the upper story is going to look like. So I completely understand the concerns of those other residents on the inside bay, but it's hard to say that a boathouse is going to be too large before it's even been designed, in my personal opinion. So there are 3 distinct frontages on this property that the applicant could construct a boathouse on. All we're doing today is giving the subject lands the ability to construct a 2-story boathouse by granting it 300 feet of bylaw frontage. It's not, in effect, approving a boathouse in that location today. So I just wanted to make that a little more clear.
No, I understand that, but that is all we have in front of us. But I just thought I'd ask the question. Anyway, okay, we were going to move now to our councillors. Councillor Nishikawa, I see you. Councillor Zavitz, I'll get to you.
Thank you. Again, probably my concern is along the same lines as everyone's, and I have a concern that that we have not identified a building envelope. And I'm not actually, I mean, I understand that we're trying to correct an issue from Committee of Adjustment. I do wonder, and perhaps Councillor Edwards could comment, of if the Committee of Adjustment actually had concerns about where a potential boathouse would go as well. It's interesting because the pictures are very deceiving, I will say. For some of us that know that area, that bay, it is really pretty tight little community situation. And then, even when you go further down towards Torrance, it just even gets tighter. So I'm just wondering about that question of if had there been a development envelope, and do we have the ability to see that prior to approving this going forward?
Okay, thank you. Yes, Mr. Sharp.
Through you, Chair Bridgeman. So the applicant and Mr. Huizinga, they opted not to provide those design details as part of this application. However, I think, you know, given what's before committee, it is a consideration. You're essentially conferring development rights that would allow this type of building to be constructed on the property. So there's a couple of options. One would be perhaps having heard from the neighbors through this process and the bylaw that's in front of you, you could actually restrict, say, a boathouse from being constructed along the westerly shoreline, leaving the remainder of the property open for development. That is one option, and that could be done without having to defer the application and keep things moving forward for the applicant. Alternatively, it could be deferred, and Mr. Huizinga and his client could go back to the drawing board and put together a detailed proposal of what exactly is going to be built and where. However, I'm not sure in that case whether that's actually required given the initial option that's in front of committee. In regard to Councillor Nishikawa's comment about the photos, obviously it's a very unique property, and I did my best to try and you know, capture the property the best I could, but it is you know, a point of land, and it can be difficult to do that. So you know, point taken. We'll definitely in the future try to do our best to get better photos. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I go to Councillor Jaglowitz, Councillor Edwards, would you like to comment on Councillor Nishikawa's question?
It's been a while, but I'll try. I think if you look at page 82, and I believe that little box near the road, I think that was for the septic, if I'm not mistaken, and that, but there was no site plan and that put on there. I think it should be. I would have trouble supporting one in that westerly little bay, and even in the easterly bay. I think on the open side would be the best spot for it, but like I say, I would like to see something like that. I know there were and that's some concerns at the time, but I can't just and that put my finger on it. I think it goes back to 2019. So Mr. Sharp would probably know a little bit better than I would, maybe, because he's got the file right there.
Yes, he has his hand up. Mr. Sharp?
Just to touch on that further, when the consent application was brought forward to the Committee of Adjustment in 2019, we did include, you know, very similar wording as we did in this report regarding neighbors' comments. Unfortunately, Mr. Hutton, he arrived at the hearing, which back in, you know, pre-COVID was in council chambers. He actually arrived late. So Committee of Adjustment had already made their decision, and Mr. Hutton's comments arrived late. So unfortunately, after that application was approved, I did hear from Mr. Hutton and numerous other landowners stating their concerns. There was an opportunity to appeal the decision. That didn't happen. So here we are today, somewhat fortuitous for the neighbors, you know, because of the technical matter that we're dealing with in terms of how frontage is measured. You know, the matter is back in front of Planning Committee. So.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jaglowitz.
Thank you, Chair, through you. So I was there this morning in a boat looking around, know the property very well. I would draw your attention for context to the photos. Figure 4 is really helpful. Bryce, you did a good job with your photographs, by the way. Figure 4 is probably why the natives are restless, if you will, because certainly that is a beautiful little bay. That's the subject bay that is being discussed. That is a sandy, shallow bay. So when you see the what looks to be a brand new dock, essentially large dock, into that bay, when if I could draw your attention to figure 5, which is showing you the flagpole, and then that whole deeper water into Lake Muskoka, if you will, frontage. Yeah, that's where a boathouse should go. If you would have, Mr. Rossi would have placed that boathouse near figure 4 or on that dock isn't even big enough for a boathouse, but were he to establish a boathouse in addition to that dock in that little bay, that wouldn't be very kind. That would be cruel. Quite honestly, it would encroach on everyone else's physical space. And I would just recommend to, the property is well developed. There's large docks on that property. It is a large 800 foot. It feels like that. All the buildings are dark gray. They're in keeping with the shoreline and everything else. And I think that Mr. Hutton's words, they've done a great job. I just think I have no problem with this, recognizing it as 300.9. I just would suggest that when it comes that time that Graham works with Mr. Rossi to site that boathouse, I think sort of facing the entrance to Dark Bay. And again, these pictures are great pictures. It really helps put you there. So appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hayes.
Once we recognize the frontage as 300.9 feet, I understand that if a boathouse, a 2-story boathouse was requested, it would just go to the building department. It wouldn't come back to us because that is of right. Okay. Just
do we want that confirmed? Yes, Mr. Sharp.
Through you, Chair Bridgeman. That is correct. There is a single-story land-based sleeping cabin on the property, so that would need to be dealt with. Otherwise, you'd have 2 sleeping cabins, which wouldn't be permitted. However, with that issue resolved and this application approved, Mr. Rossi could go to the building department and apply for a building permit for a as-of-right 2-story boathouse, which I think was the point that I was trying to make, was that if planning committee is considering approval, or considering recommending this for approval. Again, if the concern is a 2-story boathouse along that westerly frontage, that could be restricted through what's in front of you today.
Councillor Hayes.
Supplemental?
Yes.
Then I would be more comfortable recognizing the 300.9 frontage if the boathouse was restricted from being built on the westerly bay.
Thank you. I am going to do a straw poll now. I see nods. Have I got general agreement on that? Okay, so I believe we're going to have to modify the motion then. Any more comments? Oh, right. Sorry, Mr. Zinga, are you good with that?
As a planner, that sounds like a perfectly reasonable approach. I don't want to commit Mr. Rossi to anything, though. If that's the direction we're headed, would council be amenable to deferral to the next month's meeting so that I can discuss with the property owner?
Absolutely, we will. Councillor Edwards, do you still want to speak?
No, that's fine. At this time, a deferral would be great. We could also put that under site plan control if we do actually approve this, and then we could set the boathouse and help the neighbors out. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I believe Mayor Harding was also, Mr. Sharp, can I let him jump in first, Mayor Harding?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Chair Bridgeman. I just wanted to note that, if Planning Committee makes a recommendation to council, this will be returning to council next month. So what I would suggest is that you go ahead and make your recommendation as you see fit. And in the meantime, Mr. Huizinga can have that conversation with his client, and we'll see where the cards fall next month.
Thank you. I'm going to guess that's what Mayor Harding was going to suggest.
100%.
Yes.
Bryce, you took the words out of my mouth. Let's pass this today and then deal with it again in 30 days.
Okay, Councillor Nishikawa.
I also wanted to say that essentially I was going to go along the same lines that, but I also wanted to suggest that I personally do not need to see a set of drawings for permit purposes prior to this coming to council, or not, or even at council. I think it's just the agreement that I'm looking for, that it wouldn't be built on that westerly section. So again, I wouldn't want the applicant to have to try to scramble to go and spend a bunch of money with looking to get drawings done at this time. I think that that's an unnecessary expense going forward. So.
But I agree. I think that is the understanding of this committee, that we're just going to limit that west side, and in the future, the plans will come back and probably just go to building. All right, so Mr. Pink is just updating that motion right now. Okay, moved by Councillor Hayes, seconded by Councillor Edwards. Be it resolved, the Planning Committee recommend to Township Council that ZBA-23/20 bylaw 2020-102 Rossi Roll number 6-9-034 be approved, subject to a prohibition on the two-story boathouses along the westerly frontage of the property. Hey, any discussion? All in favor? Good, Madam Clerk. Okay. Okay. All right, Mr. Huizinga, you could go back to your client and we'll see you at the council meeting, would be my guess.
Thank you very much for your time.
Okay.
Take care.
Okay. Find my agenda here. Yeah, they're waiting. Okay, I agree. So we're going to move now to 11A because we have delegations still waiting. This would be my conflict of interest. So Councillor Jaglowitz, as Vice Chair, I'm about to turn this over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So then we will now consider agenda item 11A, and I believe Mr. Pink is going to introduce it. Are you there, Mr. Pink?
Oh, sorry, hang on.
I am here. Thank you, Vice Chair Jaglowitz. Just very quickly, again, I think committee members are likely familiar with this application. The Muskoka Lakes Golf and Country Club acquired a neighboring property separated by a road allowance running to Lake Rosso. They wish to rezone that property to open space OS3, which would be consistent with the remainder of their lands. The neighboring property owner in particular, as well as some others, raised some concerns with the compatibility of future development moving closer to their property. The application was originally recommended for refusal by Planning Committee. Council did refer that back to Planning Committee. We've had a number of meetings, and I understand the applicant and the neighbors have had discussions, and they've generally come to an agreement. That revised proposal is before you currently. You'll see that the parties have agreed to relocate the road allowance. Of course, that would be subject to a future council approval, but the bylaw could be made subject to a hold to ensure that occurs. As well, the proponents have agreed to remove the existing boathouse and relocate it more easterly. As well, they have provided a more detailed site plan for your review, showing a parking layout, as well as a potential future building envelope and a revised boathouse. So I will leave my comments at that. I am available to answer any questions. I understand the applicants are here. They wish to speak, as well as, I believe, Mr. Bryant, the neighboring property owner.
That is correct. So I guess we'll take...
Rennie, that's right, as well, wishes to speak. That was added as a supplementary agenda.
Yes, I have three listed. And I guess we'll start with them in order. Stefan, would you like to go first? I guess we'll have to let him in first, right? That's Stefan Scherback from Planscape. And the other two are Tim Bryant and Tom Rennie. And we can either let them in or they can wait their turn, whatever's the protocol here. Go ahead, Stefan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of committee, thank you to Mr. Pink for the brief summary. I will be short and sweet with this one. I'm pleased to say to the committee that the neighbors have come to an agreement. The revised plan is in front of the committee. And the items are all listed correctly in the staff report. There's a number of requests. I think there's 7 or 8 that are in the staff report. There's no need to go through them. I do note that staff did suggest that the habitable portion of the structure on the water be removed so as not to permit an office. I can advise you that the owners are agreeable to that, so there's no question, no concern. We are fully supportive of staff's recommendations in front of you. We fully understand that there is going to be a site plan agreement necessary with a number of additional items that have been agreed with the neighbors. These things include the construction of privacy fences, limiting parking, proposed lighting areas to ensure that there's no spillage onto the neighboring property, circular driveways, walkways, etc. There's a number of site plan items that have been suggested and revised accordingly, and that is all in the plan in front of you. And there are just 3 other items that are not necessarily a municipal concern, and one is just to ensure that there's no significant food preparation found in the building, and that the owners have agreed privately to not obtain a liquor license for the property itself. So basically, in conclusion, we continue to share staff's opinion, both on their January 10th, 2020 staff report and the one in front of you today, with the proposed amendments, including the provision of a hold. We fully understand and respect that it's subject to a future council meeting with respect to the closure of the road allowance and the transfer of lands. And again, everything seems to be in shape, and I'm here if committee members have any questions or concerns. Thank you.
Okay, and I think, Kelly, we'll maybe have Mr. Rennie in next, if he's available.
Yes, good morning, councillors. I'm really just here. I was a late addition. Hopefully you can all hear me, but I'm just really here to oversee and perhaps be available if there are any questions from anyone. Thank you.
Okay, that's simple. So then next, Kelly, we have Mr. Bryant. Tim, can you unmute yourself and possibly turn your video on? The floor is yours.
There we go.
Okay.
Am I there now?
Yes, you are, Tim. The floor is yours.
Okay, great. Thanks. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, we've getting along with the neighbors quite well on this, the project that they're proposing. And at this time, we're quite happy with everything that they've done. And so we're happy to hear what the planning committee has to say today.
Okay. Is that all you wish to say at this time?
That's right. Yep.
Okay. Then committee, are there any questions of the 3 delegates at this point before we discuss it ourselves? I see a hand from Councillor Jaglowitz.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I am particularly pleased with the outcome, with the progress. The community has spoken here, and I have a good recollection of this file from when it first came to us, and I think it's pretty marvelous outcome, and I applaud you all for working together for a solution, so thank you.
So what we're trying to do is take questions from the delegates at this point, then we'll go into discussion. Ruth, you're next.
Thank you. I believe that my question, well, first of all, I thought I was going to be asking Stefan, but I think that probably I'll stick to a staff comment or a staff answer. I'm challenged with our definition under open space definition. It seems contrary to what Planscape in number 7 are discussing. So what is allowed in open space and what we are proposing doesn't really work with me. And I'm trying to understand, for instance, is this property really meant to be more of a landing? Because it feels like a landing when we're putting so many parking spaces in. And is there currently a landing on the golf course property? And this, when I'm saying landing, is that people park there and leave their vehicles there overnight to access elsewhere.
It's probably best that Mr. Sherbach answer that. Are you prepared to?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. Question regarding the landing, no. The owners have no intention of creating a landing. It's not contemplated, nor has it ever been contemplated on the subject property. I understand there is a landing on the opposite side of the boathouse that currently legally exists on the golf course property, and that is to remain. The OS3 zone was technically proposed to somewhat share a similar zoning with the golf course. Again, not, to ensure that the golf course use is not permitted, but there are some synergies back and forth between the golf course and this property, for kids programming and, mainly for portions of their sailing program, swimming program. It will be worked collectively, on this property, and hence the reason for the OS3 zoning. But we've also limited the uses to be very, very specific to ensure that there's no question as to how the property can be used moving forward.
Mr. Pink, would you like to add to that, or are you okay?
Just to add to that, thank you, Stefan, through you, Chair. I think what may be somewhat confusing, Committee Member Nishikawa, typically we deal with open space OS2 zonings quite often. And you're correct, they're meant for recreational passive uses. We don't really allow many, if at all, buildings in an open space OS2 zone. You don't probably see many OS3 zones, but it actually is an identified commercial open space zone that does allow golf courses, private clubs, and private parks. So the way we've set up the draft bylaw through the minor amendments is to rezone this to be open space OS3. That would be consistent with the golf course, but we would not allow the golf course use on this property, just the private club portion. And then with respect to the waterfront landing, those concerns were raised previously by neighbors that has the potential to expand the waterfront landing onto this property. The draft bylaw through minor amendments would specifically prohibit a waterfront landing use on this property, just to be abundantly clear. It's not permitted as of right, but I believe the bylaw will be explicit to prohibit it.
Councillor Jaglowitz, could I ask one more question, please?
Absolutely.
So going
then
back,
I'll go to Councillor Kelly just to set the order. Thank you.
Thank you. Just going back to the boathouse and the use only being storage and marine related as far as our bylaw goes. But I'm not hearing that that's what the proposed use is going to be. So it seems a challenge for me to see the differences or finding a way to approve the differences.
Who would you like that directed to?
Mr. Pink, mostly.
It's actually a fair question. I would perhaps look to Mr. Sherbach a little bit. Staff's recommendation is to prohibit habitable uses. You indicated your client's agreeable to that. I wonder then what use is proposed in the boathouse. I think we want to make it clear. I wonder if even the term boathouse is appropriate if it's not going to store boats. Some clarity as to what the intended use of that structure, future building is, and to ensure that it is appropriate. I think we could add that clarity to the bylaw between now and council, or if Mr. Sherbach can expand on that for us at this time.
Thank you through you, Mr. Chair. And again, I'll turn to Mr. Rennie just to ensure that the club's recommendations are, I'm correct with what I'm about to say, but it is there for mainly storage purposes. It's also there that if it's a rainy day, the sailing program needs a place to do some indoor activity. There's no proposed boat slips inside this. We've been abundantly clear that this is the case. And there's no parking of boats with the exception of a chase boat, a tin boat for the sailing program for safety reasons. There'll be no cleats or anything, tied up to ensure that members can't just tie up to this dock. So it is there that, again, for storage, but also it's complementary to inclement weather as it relates to any of the outdoor programming that the club offers.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, and through you. Actually, I think Councillor Nishikawa just asked the identical question. And so I don't need to re-ask, but I'll save my comments until we get to discussion.
Okay, so I see no more hands for questions. So if that's the case, we'll thank the delegates for their contribution and we'll move to discussion. Whoever would like to go, put your hand up. I have a question to Mr. Pink. I'm chairing this, but I actually don't have the resolution in front of me. It wasn't provided to me. And I also noticed that you are going to have to amend it for the habitable space, I believe. And possibly some clarification on the usage. And then you mentioned something in your opening remarks about a holding. Could you just be a little clearer as to how we'll handle the resolution? I don't have it.
I think unfortunately your audio is cutting in and out, but I think I caught the majority of that, Chair. Vice Chair, I believe the clerk just emailed you the resolution, so you can read it, although I think alternatively, perhaps the clerk or I could, and if that's difficult. Just to clarify the holding zone was originally applied for. What the hold zone would ultimately include is the zoning would not take place until the hold is lifted, and the hold can't be lifted until the council were to approve the relocation of the road allowance. And number two, that all the existing structures are removed. There's currently a number of, I believe there's 2 cottages on the property and a boathouse. So the new uses and the zoning won't take effect until they actually remove all those buildings and relocate the road allowance, at which time the bylaw would come back to council, not the bylaw, but a proposal to lift the hold would come to council at future time.
Okay, so I now have the resolution, but I believe you have to add something to it for the habitable space, or how are we going to handle that? And I have you, Councillor Kelly.
Yeah, quick look at the resolution and see if we could just make that wording a little more clear. That we'll see if I can tweak that.
And then how are you going to handle the usage? Just leave it. Okay, David's gone. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, and through you, and this may require further tweaking on habitable use. A comment and really a question for Mr. Pink, but wasn't that long ago, maybe last round, when this very committee took umbrage with an applicant, I believe, who had converted his boathouse into some kind of space other than a space to store boats and marine equipment. And I recall very clearly in the application before us, when it was first presented maybe a year ago, that the boathouse now being torn down was actually intended to be used as a clubhouse. And it sounds to me like it's still intended to be used as a clubhouse, and that I'm a little confused when I talk about storage. Mostly storage, I think, is what Mr. Sherbak said. And the question really is, when it comes down to looking at the definition of inhabitable space, it's not clear to me what that means. Does that require sleeping arrangements? Does that simply a space that you can take shelter from the rain? To me, we're going about this wrong and saying it won't be inhabitable space unless we're really clear and specific in what we consider to be, habitation. And what this clearly isn't is a boathouse. Doesn't appear to be even contemplated as a boathouse. So I just have an issue with that. I want to make sure we're consistent in our understanding of what the proposed use is, and that proposed use is consistent with the bylaws and with the treatment that we've afforded other applicants who have come to us and had issues because they either filled in their space and use it as a living room or whatever. And so that's where my concern lies, and that may require some drafting in the resolution to more specifically define what we are prepared to allow or not allow in that space.
Director Pink, would you like to respond?
I think Chair Jaglowitz, we're not getting the audio in the room when you speak, but I think you were looking to me to respond. I would agree with committee member Kelly. I think committee should provide some clear direction at this point as to what they feel appropriate in that boathouse. And then I can craft the resolution to very clearly allow that. We've heard from the applicant that storage and some indoor activity area in the first story of that boathouse is proposed with respect to their programming. Again, I can make that very clear in the resolution that the bylaw would allow that and nothing else in that boathouse, marine related storage and that private club use, if that's agreeable to committee. If not, again, I would look for direction and we can word the resolution accordingly.
So is everybody having trouble hearing me, or is it just Mr. Pink? Oh, you're okay.
I hear you now.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, so can we have a nodding of heads as to whether that's the type of where you'd like to go to limit the usage? Is that the concept? And who wants to see? Sorry.
I think Councillor Edwards has his hands up. Just
yes,
so
I see it there, Councillor Edwards. I have Councillor Edwards.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much. I also have concerns about habitable space. I don't mind a boathouse being storage or anything else like that. But, you know, if we allow this and it becomes basically a clubhouse, and then we're going to see an awful lot of clubhouses for every resort, every camp and everything else like that throughout, and that boathouses, it says boathouse, and that I don't mind the storage of it and that, but you know, I really do have concerns, and I'm sure a lot of the constituents around the lake would have concerns about these going up. So I would really like that clarified, though I'm glad that they work with the neighbors. I'm glad to see everything going, but you know, if it's going to be a clubhouse, it should be on land.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Hardy.
I guess I'm wondering what the zoning on the regular golf club property is, because they have theoretically a clubhouse, they have dining areas. Cleveland's House has dining areas on the water. Lake Joe Club has dining areas on the water. And, you know, this was a residential property. They're trying to add it in. I think the bottom line is add it into the golf club. The neighbors certainly didn't have, which would be the most egregious people, don't have a problem with it being used as quote unquote, I'll call it a clubhouse for indoor activities if it's raining, for the kids to go inside. And again, there's been a boathouse on the property. So I don't want to get caught in our zoning. And I honestly, if kids are going to be inside this part of the recreation of the golf club, I don't really have a problem with that. And I just want to make sure our zoning is appropriate.
Okay. Now I'm a bit.
Wants a comment.
I'm sorry. Yes,
I
see.
He wanted to comment.
Who wanted to? Sorry, I couldn't hear you. Go ahead, David.
Thank you. I think just to clarify the last two comments from the mayor and committee member Edwards, I think part of the confusion may be stemming from the open space OS3 zone is not a zone we typically deal with. In the open space OS3 zone, and I'm not aware of the history, I think this has been in place probably since '87, specifically prohibits the use of a boathouse for nothing but marine storage of boats and marine related equipment, similar to the waterfront residential area. Waterfront commercial zones, when you refer to other resorts, Touchstone, etc., does not have that same clause. It does allow a restaurant, or as we've seen in some resorts, an accommodation unit above in a boathouse use. I presume the existing boathouse on the Muskoka Lakes Golf and Country Club property likely predates our zoning bylaw, if I had to presume. So just to provide a bit of background and clarity on the functioning of our zoning bylaw.
Thank you. I'll just go back to Mayor Harding and then to Ruth.
Thank you. And again, you know, I think everybody understood. We've always heard clubhouse in this going forward. I appreciate OEP's 3-zone prohibits it. I would recommend then personally a minor amendment to allow it, because it would be in keeping with the rest of the property. I may be the lone wolf in that, but I think let's not complicate things. Let's not try to create something different. You know, they have not a resort, but they have a golf club with kids programs and everything else. And, you know, contained in the boathouse, I think, and Mr. Bryant being the neighbor is also in supportive of the same.
So I wonder if we're now got 2 or 3 amendments, whether we need to set this aside for a few minutes, or how do we deal with it? But I'll let Councillor Nishikawa speak first.
Thank you. Hang on, the dog's barking, of course. I just wanted to state, my concern is the fact that we are trying to squeeze something into a zone while I don't believe that it fits there. The real use of this building, this property, is, I believe, more of a commercial function, more, I don't believe that ever that our municipality be visiting and checking and seeing what type of activities are going to happen. So therefore, I cannot support it, because I cannot support that we in fact are going to be in a different situation, that, well, you've allowed this elsewhere, now allow others. And the reality is that I think that this is too far of a stretch without getting, I don't feel comfortable that this is only going to be used when it's raining and the kids are going to run inside. I'm not comfortable under this open space definition. I don't know. I believe that it should be commercial. I think we should call it what it is. And I'm not hearing that now.
So Director Pink, do you think you get a sense of what's being said to revise something, or do we need some time? I think this is the last item on the agenda, so we could take a 5-minute break or something, or do you still need more direction?
Actually, I think we've only heard from the mayor and Member Nishikawa, and they seem to be on opposite pages as to what's appropriate in the boathouse. So I'm not sure if we have got clear direction. Perhaps
I agree with you. So is there anyone else
from other members whether the clubhouse use is appropriate in the boathouse or not?
So we now have Councillor Jaglowitz who would like to speak, and please others express your view if you're on one side or the other. Councillor Jaglowitz.
Thank you, Chair, through you. To Mr. Rennie, if I might, if he's still on board here, I wonder if we could actually speak to the people that are involved and own it in terms of what is the intended use.
Well, let me inquire. Mr. Rennie, are you still here?
Yes, I am. Can you? Oh, yeah. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, I can hear you. Okay, go ahead, Councillor Jaglowitz.
Okay, great. Well, yes. So obviously, if you recall, we've agreed to remove the existing boathouse, and we obviously require storage for boats in the wintertime. So, for example, sailboats, canoes, or tin boats, that type of thing. So we have to really find a replacement. And really, this is what this is all about. We already have food and beverage and alcohol uses, but on the property, we don't need to host events or to sell food or drinks or that type of thing. That's not what this intended use of the boathouse is. So while the OS3 zoning would apply, the boathouse by no means is going to operate as some type of a commercial or retail establishment where we're selling things or that type of thing. I would really refer to it as a boathouse shelter. In other words, we can store boats for 6 months of the year in the off season. And obviously when it's a nice sunny day in Muskoka, people want to be out and about. But if it by chance does rain, for example, or there's lightning in the area, that is the shelter portion of it. So we're not trying to make this complicated. I would certainly welcome the whatever changes you would recommend in terms of the bylaw. But again, storage and shelter are the two operative words here. We're not going to run a retail store, for example. We're not going to host events with members and that type of thing. So I hopefully that does provide some clarity. And thank you for asking the question.
So if those Director Pink, if Director Pink made that type of a change to the motion, would that satisfy those? Or I see Mayor Harding would still like to speak. Go ahead.
Thank you. Again, I think, we've heard it's storage in the off season. Yes, kids would stand in there. My boathouse is used for marine storage, but I can stand inside my boathouse if it's raining and get out of the rain. It is part of, I think Councillor Nishikawa's comments was, it's a commercial property beside, if I may, and we need to look at it as total of the Muskoka Lakes Golf and Country Club. So is the OS3 zone the right zone or not? And I think, again, is there an amendment that talks specifically about what's allowed inside? That's my only perspective. I hate to limit this property we can do this on, and this section we can't do this on. So I think Mr. Rennie kind of gave us the definition of, yes, if it's raining, some kids may go inside.
Councillor Kelly.
Through you, and thank you. I'm still very troubled by this. We can all go to any boathouse on the lake and take shelter if we get hit by lightning. The biggest difference is in just about every other boathouse on the lake, we can also park a boat. And if this is a building that really is only permitted because of its ability to store boats and marine related equipment and nothing else, I think it fails the test. And we've held others to a higher standard than I think what we're proposing right here. That's my biggest concern. We're unveiling a new loophole that will be available to everybody who chooses to build accommodation over water. And I think it's a dangerous precedent.
I see Councillor Roberts next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I just echo what Councillor Kelly and I believe Councillor Edwards was referring to. This is a dangerous precedent, and I think we got to find a workaround or not approve this.
Okay, anybody else? So it seems to me that we either have to, sorry, I'll just say something and then I'll recognize your Councillor Jaglowitz. It seems to me we either have to take a break and work out on some wording, or we have to defer this. What is the wish to move forward with some amendment or defer it? Anyway, Councillor Jaglowitz.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I think it's important to remember that the boathouse that exists, there's a boathouse there now. The Muskoka Lakes Golf and Country Club does not have to tear that boathouse down. I think they're doing that as an olive branch. I do understand certainly Councillor Kelly and some of the other concerns. I view this as a commercial type facility. It certainly is. And I think that there needs to be, they have multi-purpose buildings, not so much multi-use, but multi-purpose buildings because of, whether it's lawn machinery or cutting machinery or golfing equipment or whatever it is, that this happens to be, in this case, boats or whatever. I'm not suggesting we should be more lenient, but I think we need to be understanding of the commercial aspect of this to this particular facility. Otherwise, they'll just, there goes the negotiations. They'll leave the boathouse where it is. If I'm correct, they can. And the boathouse exists and there it is. So I would challenge us to think hard about this one.
I'll refer, Director Pink, do you think you have enough to have some amended wording, or are you still confused?
Clerk just commented that she's confused. I think the the committee seems fairly split. I think I hear certainly the mayor and Councillor Jaglowitz okay with some commercial type use storage and a private club type activity that would occur during off weather. But it appears other committee members don't agree with that approach and would prefer to restrict it to entirely just storage. Unless I'm misreading, those are the two sides that I'm hearing. I'm not sure which has the majority.
Hardy.
Thank you. I just, if we remember back in history here, the neighbors' big concern were there going to be boats parked around this boathouse, and they don't want boats because it interferes with their program. So they've asked for it to be non-boats, but yet we're saying if you put a slip in it, so we're conflicting with the neighbor. It's tied to a commercial property, and occasionally it's going to go inside. This isn't opening Pandora's box for everybody who's got an open space commercial property. And I've heard from the applicant, I think that if it's raining, the kids go inside, but they want a place to store some boats outside. They want to run a swim program off the dock to swim over in that area. They need that. And I don't see any problem with this application. And I think, we've spent almost a year and a half, 2 years going back and forth to satisfy the neighbors. We finally satisfy the neighbors, and now we're getting in the way. So I think if there's some language that needs to be tweaked, but I don't think there is actually. Now that I listen to it, I think we're actually okay.
I have Councillor Nishikawa and then Councillor Maston.
Thank you. My concerns will, again, I just want to call it what it is, in my opinion. And Open Space 3 does not allow this activity. If it needs to go back to staff and the applicant to define it as what I'm hearing is the potential use. And I don't necessarily use the term commercial, that there has to be resale of a product or those types of things, but it's the actual activities that happen on commercial properties that are open to the public, quite frankly, or members. So I think that calling it an open space, that open space definition does not fit with me, and maybe that's where things get changed. But right now, under our bylaws, it says boathouse is boathouse use only for storage and marine related uses. And then I guess we have to decide what marine related uses are when it comes to the habitable use. But mostly Open Space 3 should not be applied in this case, because I think it opens up concerns that other activities are going to happen anyhow. So why not do it right the first time here?
Councillor Maston.
Thank you, and through you. Question for you, Director Pink. I think you say that OS3 is not a very common designation. Is this a common zoning? Do we have that in a lot of different locations around the lake?
Director Pink.
I have a number off the top of my head, but generally speaking, no, it's not an overly common zone. It's given to golf courses predominantly. So as many golf courses as you can think of, that's likely how many open space OS3 zones exist.
Councillor
Supplemental?
Sorry, Councillor Maston, supplementary.
Yeah, thank you. So as far as precedent setting, if we were able to get appropriate language to Councillor Nishikawa's point, in an OS3, that might just be a good strategy, is to allow this without it being a precedent setting across the board.
Director Pink.
Certainly tightening up the language could address future precedent concerns. Precedent is always a funny argument in planning circles. Certainly there's unique characteristics to every proposal, every piece of land. So usually they can be addressed that way. However, I wouldn't want to mislead council. Future golf course property could approach and also request habitable type uses in a boathouse based on this decision. So that risk would exist. So again, I don't know the history as to The reasoning for that provision, because in waterfront commercial zones, we don't prohibit uses in boathouses, but in the open space OS3 zone, it's a very clear provision that says marine-related equipment only and storage of boats.
So I know Councillor Jaglowitz wants to go next, but I'm going to say something and offer a couple of solutions. I think we've got two options to use Mayor Harding's phrase. We can move this along and approve it subject to appropriate wording on the usage to come forward to council, because we're at committee right now. That's one option. The other option would be to defer it. So who would like, just with a nodding of heads, who would like to move this motion in front of us subject to some wording be put in there before it goes to council to control the usage? How many, or maybe just raise hands if you don't mind. It's not a vote, just a. So how many would like to defer it? Yeah, boy, that's. Clerk, can you see what happened there, or what's your take?
Nothing.
Yeah. Okay. Does anyone have a Councillor Jaglowitz, you want? We can't go on forever like this, so I'm going to take a few more, and then we're going to have to do something.
I would agree. Thank you, and thank you, Chair. My point is one of clarity and optics. I wonder if we could wind this thing back again, to stand back for just a moment. What was the mandate, I guess to David, to Director Pink, through you, Chair, what was the mandate of this committee when last we met on this topic? What did we as a group challenge the two parties with when we dismissed them? And I think that might be relevant.
I'll have Director Pink answer that.
Yeah, allow Mr. Sherbak, if that's appropriate, to expand if I'm missing items, but I do recall the boathouse certainly being discussed. I think it was more a question of setbacks from the neighboring property owner and the proximity and potential boat use of that boathouse. But the predominant reason to defer the application was for the neighbors to have discussions with the applicant and to resolve concerns regarding anything. There was lighting, buffering, the layout of the parking. Committee also wished to see a revised site plan that shows additional details. That's been provided. And again, the applicants have met with the neighbors, and they've appeared to resolve the concerns, and hence we placed the matter back on the agenda. I don't recall, and again, I perhaps look to Mr. Sherbak, I don't specifically recall the committee debating the use inside the boathouse extensively in the past meetings, or directing that those details be ironed out. What I could suggest, again, if the seemed like maybe a slight majority wished to move this on to council, I can amend the resolution to make it clear that between now and then, that wording be proposed to council regarding the use of the boathouse, and a decision could be made at the council stage on that use. So,
Mr. Sherbak, would you like to add to that and see whether you're agreeable with that? And then I have Mayor Harding and Councillor Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you again for the opportunity to respond. I agree with Mr. Pink. Basically, the whole premise to discussions with the neighbors is to preclude boat usage in this structure. You know, there was some comments back and forth, and there was some agreement. I agree. I don't recall this being an issue with the committee. And I agree with Mr. Pink. I think the two of us, together with the neighbors and the owners, could structure some wording that appropriately addresses it. As Councillor Nishikawa mentioned, call it what it is in this situation, to specifically state it's there for the storage of marine-related, you know, sailboats in the winter, together with some, you know, programming during inclement weather or something like that. I mean, we could find out some wording that we feel should be appropriate for the council when they consider this, should it be approved today. Thank you.
And it's my understanding that both Mr. Rennie and Mr. Bryant are kind of in agreement. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow two more to speak. I'm not sure of the order, but I have Mayor Harding and Councillor Hayes. And then I would suggest, David, you do make that amendment to some amendment. You're not putting in the wording, you're just saying there will be wording coming to council. Is that the idea? And that once we've had the other two speak, I think we should maybe call the question. Mayor Harding.
Thank you. I agree with that 100%. And if we need a little bit of better language to define it, you know, again, this is our planning staff recommended this zone. The neighbors were concerned about the boathouse being too close and kids inside. It's an entire property. I think the other thing the council are worried about, you know, what are we opening up Pandora's box? You know, the Lake Joseph Club is on the water, and somewhat, I guess you could say, Bamoris Golf Club is on the water. That would be the only other golf courses that potentially might have this same zone. They could look at this as a potential leading edge of the wedge to get us in trouble. So I'm okay with this, with some tightened up language or revised language, opened up language, if you will, to come back to council.
I'm going to go to Councillor Hayes, and I see Councillor Kelly has put his hand up, but I'm going to cut it off at Councillor Hayes. I think there's no end to it. And I'm going to ask the director to change the wording. So Councillor Hayes.
Yeah, I think from the get-go, this has always been presented that the boathouse would have activities in it, children's activities in it, especially in inclement weather. So I don't think it's a surprise to us. If we can change the wording to tighten it up, I support it going forward today and being massaged between now and council.
Thank you. So Director Pink, how much time do you need? Should we take a 5-minute break or just sit here and wait for you?
Probably need 1 minute, if that's okay.
Okay. Okay, so I'll look at the clerk for a minute. It's a lengthy motion. Do you suggest I read the whole thing, or everybody has it? Can we just read the amendment, or could you help me there? Oh, sorry, Cheryl, did you hear me?
We could, I could put the resolution up on the screen so that everybody could see it, except for the amendment, which
really having an issue with the boathouse.
Yeah, all
right, good. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, can you?
Yes, no, it's okay. So you're going to put the resolution up.
I can't hear him.
What are they saying? They don't want it to be a pavilion?
Tim, we can hear what you're saying.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
No, it's no problem.
Okay, here.
As long as you're aware. I assume Tim and Tom, you were in agreement with us moving this forward today with some amendment on the usage.
Yes, absolutely, for me and Bryant and the neighbors.
Tom, are you the same?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay, so is it possible to put the amended resolution up, or is that too complicated?
Go ahead. I can. I would have to type in. I would have to get the motion and type in the revised wording so you can see it.
I'd rather not on the other side. Motion and then an amendment to the motion. We can do it all at once, can't we?
Could I not just read?
Or
the additional language?
David could read it. That's fine with me.
Okay.
But I don't know what the chair wants to do.
So what I'm doing is now, as I'm calling the vote, David's going to read the motion. And Madam Clerk, this is not an amendment because the motion has never been read. So therefore, the amendment will be just part of the motion, right?
Correct. But I can't display that right now until I get the language so you can all see it, because you have to, I should be able to display it and you guys agree that it doesn't have to be read. So.
Well, no, David's going to read it. We've decided he can read it rather than me reading it. Is that not correct? Or do I have to read it?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to suggest that David will read the motion that we're going to vote on. And you've all got it in front of you with the exception of the amendment. So would you go ahead, David?
Just to be clear, want me to read the entire resolution or just what I've changed?
No, I want you to read the entire resolution if you don't mind.
Okay. So moved by Councillor Kelly, seconded by Councillor Jaglowitz. Be it resolved that Planning Committee recommend to Council that applications ZBA 10/18, bylaw 2018-34, Muskoka Lakes Golf and Country Club Limited, roll number 54081, be approved with the following amendments. Maximum lot coverage be limited to 10% within 200 feet of the high water mark. Provisions required to lift the holding -H symbol be added that require the removal of the dock and boathouse, that the unopened original road allowance located on the eastern side of the subject property be closed and conveyed to the subject property, and that an equivalent width strip of land along the westerly side of the subject property, which extends from Lake Rosso to Shamrock Road, be conveyed to the township. Removal of golf course from the list of permitted uses. Removal of the provision that recognizes the golf course use located on the abutting lot to be considered to be a golf course use on the subject lot. Removal of exemptions to recognize the width, length, and side yard setbacks of the existing dock and boathouse to be replaced with an exemption to permit both the dock and boathouse to be a minimum of 1 meter from the new easterly lot line. An increase to the minimum required exterior side yard setback from the new westerly side lot line to 30 meters, 100 feet. That Schedule 2 to the bylaw be replaced with the revised site plan drawing, and that language clearly defining permitted uses within the boathouse be included for council's consideration. So that concludes the resolution. I would just like to clarify the 2 changes that I did make. I struck out the amendment that would prohibit habitable space in the first story of a boathouse, and I added that language clearly defining permitted uses within the boathouse be included for council's consideration. So Mr. Sherbak and I will work on a definition. We'll propose it to council in 30 days, and council can consider that at that time.
Are there any questions or comments on the motion? I see Councillor Nishikawa.
A couple of things. I guess I'm thrown off now. People might want to turn off their mics when they're speaking or they're not speaking. David, I need to now look up a definition of a pavilion because I'm hearing that is the actual direction that others may be going with this. So I just want to know. I haven't had the opportunity to pull that information up, but I want to know how that pavilion definition fits in with our OS 3.
We missed that.
David, Mr. Pink. Oh.
Apologize, I'm not sure. I don't believe I read the word pavilion, but it is defined in our zoning bylaw. It is.
David, it was actually a discussion. It wasn't written somewhere. It was certainly a discussion that some of us heard by the applicants.
I think, David, what they're referring to is I think there were some open mics, and I didn't hear it myself personally, but I think, but I think we have to get by that. I think, I believe what Councillor Nishikawa is raising is that the wording, the tightened up wording, shouldn't allow. If you shouldn't allow a pavilion, I guess, isn't that what you're saying? I don't know. I don't even know what a pavilion is, by the way. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, and through you, no questions on it, on the resolution, but I do certainly support Councillor Nishikawa's curiosity about the meaning of the word pavilion. Having heard it, you can't unhear it. That appears to be the name that's being used by the applicant for this structure that we have been referring incorrectly, as it seems, as a boathouse. And so as thrilled as I am to have these 2 neighbors come together with a happy ending on this, I'm very cautious about basically abdicating our responsibility to uphold our own zoning bylaws in favor of neighborhood agreement to do whatever it is that they come to closure on. And so we'll have more to talk about that at the next council meeting.
Thank you. I think I'll let Mr. Sherbak just answer that very briefly, just the pavilion issue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, the wording was actually from the Bryants when he was on the phone call. The applicants have never used that term, has never been into a discussion. I've looked at the definition of a pavilion and it's only required at a tourist resort use. So it really is not a question as part of this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. So I see no more questions, so I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? Tell me when you've got it, clerk. Okay. All those opposed? The motion is carried. I will now turn it back to Chair Bridgeman, if she's listening.
I am. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Jaglowitz. We do have another, which may have some discussion. We have one more item on our agenda, which is in regards to grandfathering. So I'm going to suggest a 20-minute break now. And you do the 10-minute break. We can maybe get through this by 1, but I think we need to take a comfort break at this point. So let's take a 10-minute break till 12:20, and then we'll be back for our last major discussion. Okay, everyone, if you want to come back, we'll get ready to start again.
To Barb and Cheryl, I have to leave the meeting at 12:40. Sorry about that. But just so that in case I'm on any of the motions, you could change them ahead of time.
Okay, thanks, Donalda. Donalda, are you here? I know you got your video turned off, but are you ready to go? Okay, so we have quorum. Oh, there's, okay, I think we're going to continue then. It's, we'll restart the meeting now, and we're moving now to the report from our Director of Development Services and Environmental Sustainability regarding our legal non-binding comprehensive zoning bylaw. So, Mr. Pink, would you like to give us the background on this, please?
Thank you, Chair. I've prepared a report for committee. It begins on page 118 in your agenda packages. It's a fairly technical section in our zoning bylaw, so I'll try to keep it fairly high level for committee, but happy to answer any questions or provide further details if required. This is a long-standing section in our zoning bylaw. Obviously, it has been somewhat amended over the years, but has generally been in place since the inception of the first zoning bylaw, comprehensive zoning bylaw in the township in the late 80s. And it deals with legal non-complying structures. It is a section that is quite heavily utilized. As committee can likely appreciate, a lot of legal non-complying buildings in the township exist. Our zoning bylaw, particularly along the waterfront, has become progressively more restrictive over the years, increasing setbacks from the lakes, decreasing lot coverage, increasing side yard setbacks for shoreline structures, etc. What happens when zoning bylaws become more restrictive? Obviously, the buildings that were previously constructed become legal non-complying. They do not comply with present day rules. However, they did comply at the time of construction or building permit issuance. So what this section does, it breaks down in various subsections, recognizes those non-compliances, and allows future construction or redevelopment of those structures, whether that be additions or reconstructions. So for example, if a building was on a lot that was not 100 feet in frontage or 15,000 square feet in area, there is a section in the zoning bylaw that says, in spite of that fact, that existing building can still be enlarged, it can be relocated, it can be reconstructed, etc., in spite of the deficient lot frontage. Similarly, if a building is found to be within a side yard setback from a neighboring property owner, that building could still be enlarged, provided the enlargement complies with present day requirements. Since my time, certainly at the township, and in speaking with my predecessor, essentially since the late 80s, those sections have always been interpreted and read to essentially function collectively. As in, if a property had multiple non-compliances, you would read them collectively, and each would address each individual situation, and development could still proceed. We have since received a legal opinion that advises otherwise, that they are read mutually exclusively, being that if you have a singular issue, let's say you're just within the side yard, yes, you could still expand that building in compliance. However, if you're within the side yard and also on an undersized lot, you do not get the benefit of both subsections. and essentially that building and that property is frozen. We did have that legal opinion confirmed by the township legal solicitor. Because it is such a heavily utilized section for so many years, it is going to be a fairly substantial impact, I think, to development. I felt it appropriate to bring that forward as soon as possible. As well, took the opportunity to review the section and make some changes that I felt were appropriate moving forward. And I think those changes are fairly self-explanatory in the report, breaking down section by section. Again, happy to go through those in more detail if committee wishes. But in the interest of time, I'll leave my comments at that, and happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Pink, I'm going to ask you to briefly go through this, and this is not for our councillors, but for anybody who is watching this, so that they understand what we're talking about.
Certainly happy to do so. So going through the report, you'll see, I think the most pertinent section is at the bottom of page 2, zoning bylaw recommended changes. And it essentially goes by the subsections in 3.2, identifies what the issue or what the provision controls and recommends changes. So the first is with respect to undersized lots. And it does, this section again, does clearly permit where a building is on an undersized lot. And again, when I say undersized lot, just to back up a little bit further, we have certain zones that require much larger lot sizes when one is looking to create new properties. For example, in a WR6 zone, we require 400 feet and 2 acres in order to subdivide. So a property would actually have to be 800 feet of frontage and 4 acres in order to subdivide. However, there is an existing lot of record criteria that does allow building on lots down to 100 feet and down to 15,000 square feet. What subsection 3.2b states is if a property is, if a structure exists on a lot less than 100 feet and or less than 15,000 square feet, that owner would still be permitted to expand that structure. That's still in place today. That section is very clear. However, what the legal opinions have done is if that building also had other non-compliances, such as over lot coverage or over height or within a side yard or a front yard setback, they would no longer be permitted to expand. What I've suggested as a recommended change, I think have thought for quite some time that the permission to expand buildings on properties, in particular less than 100 feet, is a fairly small amount of frontage, is quite permissive. Also have concerns with allowing expansions on properties less than 15,000 square feet in area, as it can be quite difficult to find appropriate area for servicing septic systems. And I've suggested the recommended change is that provision be revised to state that expansions or enlargements are no longer permitted on undersized lots, that being less than 100 feet or 15,000 square feet. Again, what an owner could do is still, of course, make application for minor variance or zoning bylaw amendment, and we would review each of those proposals on a case-by-case basis. Moving on to required yards, subsection C. Again, I think I've touched on this, so I won't go into too much detail. Again, but essentially what this section allows is if your structure exists, let's say within too close proximity to the road or a neighboring property line, that building could remain, obviously, but you would also be permitted to expand that building, provided the expansion complies with present day setbacks. Staff don't recommend that any changes are needed to this. Again, the municipality cannot be retroactive. We cannot correct the existing infraction. That building can remain and those rights exist. Provided the addition complies with today's requirements, I feel it's appropriate to continue to allow those types of additions without the need for a minor variance or zoning amendment. Moving on to lot coverage, subsection 3.2d. Currently, what the zoning bylaw allows is if you have a property that exceeds lot coverage, let's say you're over 10% on Lake Rosso, the zoning bylaw allows you to build a second story in spite of the fact that you're over lot coverage. Keep in mind that all second stories have to comply with lot coverage as well. This, I think, I'm certainly more open to debate or my opinion being swayed on this, but I feel it is appropriate to remove this permission. Certainly controlling built form and ensuring the natural form dominates is a very prominent theme in our official plan. And I question the appropriateness of a property that exceeds lot coverage to be permitted to allow potentially a large amount of second story development. I think it has the potential to worsen an existing situation by allowing second story permissions as of right. And again, the recommendation is that a minor variance or zoning bylaw amendment have to be submitted in order to allow that development. Alternatively, obviously with any of these, that provision could remain in place. I think it's safe to say that our official plan and zoning bylaw is very restrictive on footprints, and it therefore does sort of more encourage building up as opposed to out. And if council wants to leave that permission in place, the provision could remain and allow that as of right. Moving on to height, subsection G. What this section allows is where there is a lawful non-complying building, one can increase the height of that building, provided, of course, it complies with height requirements. We don't necessarily, we don't allow an increase in floor area, but we do allow, let's say, volume to be increased. What it typically allows is changes in roof line. So property owners may change roof pitches, go, for example, on a boathouse from a flat roof boathouse to a peaked roof. And that's something actually the municipality typically encourages. So again, in this section, staff do not recommend any changes, but given the legal opinions received, there may be some clarifying language that may need to occur, but we do suggest that this provision remain. The last section, moving on, it's the top of page 4 of the staff report, shoreline structure widths. This is subsection H. What this section allows, and I think those on Committee of Adjustment or more familiar with their zoning bylaw likely have run into this on a number of occasions, where a property has docks or boathouses which exceed the permitted widths. So they exceed the amount of frontage along their property that the zoning bylaw would allow. On the big 3 lakes, 25% or 75 feet. The zoning bylaw does allow additions to those structures, provided the width isn't worsened. So essentially it would allow that dock or boathouse to extend in length out further into the lake. So a property owner could have an extensive walkway along, for example, 100, 200 feet of their shoreline. One would think with a 200-foot width, where we allow only 25% or 75 feet, might freeze that structure. The zoning bylaw has allowed for many years for that dock or boathouse to be extended in length. And this, as I say, comes up fairly often at Committee of Adjustment hearings. Typically, applicants will argue, this is what the zoning bylaw will permit me to do as of right. I can go out 66 feet, quite considerable width and length, but I'm only looking to increase width a little bit further. That has much less of an impact, so I should be permitted that. And I know, and Mr. Allen, Mr. Edwards, Committee Member Edwards, sorry, can likely vouch for this. Committee of Adjustment regularly struggles with those arguments and those permissions. I think personally, my recommendation, it's a rather permissive provision in the zoning bylaw. It allows, again, structures which could considerably exceed current widths to further expand, granted in length, and potentially add to built form dominating the shoreline even more so than currently. And I would suggest that that provision be removed. And if a property owner has docks that exceed width and they wish to redevelop those docks, that they would proceed via minor variance or zoning amendment, and a site-specific review of that proposal would be undertaken. Just lastly, I think that's a hopefully not too lengthy, and committee found that helpful to break down each section, what the zoning bylaw currently allows and what staff's recommending. But again, happy to go into further detail or answer questions. Just lastly, to touch on next steps, if committee agrees with these changes or any subsequent changes, what staff would do is prepare a notice, prepare a draft bylaw, and we would have a public meeting. The public would be notified. Likely it would be next year or spring even. I don't think we would want to have a public meeting on these types of changes over Christmas or perhaps in the middle of winter. But we do want to get public input. They're fairly substantial changes, and committee at that time could certainly further debate the issue and make a recommendation to council. Hope those comments are of assistance.
Thank you, Mr. Pink. Any clarifying questions? And then maybe we'll go into discussion. Councillor Kelly?
Sorry, not a question, just discussion. Oh, wait.
Let's see if anybody has any clarifying questions. Mayor Harding.
Thank you. Through you to Mr. Pink. The shoreline structure widths, and I'm confused a little bit about your wording. So somebody has 75 feet wide, let's say 100 feet wide of dock, but it only goes out 50 feet. We allow out to 66 feet. Currently, they could take the full 100 feet out to 66 feet. No, currently they could only go out the 75 feet to 66 feet. So what are we actually proposing to remove in this? You're saying if they only go out 50 feet out of the 100 feet, everything's frozen.
Yes, Mr. Pink.
What I have recommended is removing that permission, that as of right permission. So if a property owner, again, was allowed, say, 50 feet of dock width, but had 100 feet of dock width, if they wish to expand it, whether wider or added length, unless they fully brought it into compliance, which they could reduce the width, and they could then expand as of right. But if they wanted to retain the width that exceeds the permissions, and they wanted to do further additions to that, that should require a minor variance application or a zoning bylaw amendment application. So just to simplify or reiterate, you have a 100-foot wide dock. Currently, you could take 75 feet of it and go out in length 66 feet. I'm suggesting if you have a 100-foot wide dock and you want to keep a 100-foot wide dock and you want to make additions to it, that would require a minor variance because, again, I think a prominent theme in our official plan, as committee knows, is to control density, to control build form along our shorelines. When you exceed lot coverage or you exceed dock width, I think the as of right permission to have further development, I think perhaps should be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. I think we've seen some examples of rather permissive additional development where one would question whether the official plan is being properly implemented with these legal non-complying sections. So.
Okay, thank you. And I'll just, I think everyone heard some feedback in there. I think either Barb's speaker was on or mic was on in the thing. You can't have two speakers or two mics on in the chamber, as you know.
Sorry about that. I thought I had cut myself off properly there. Okay, any more questions of clarification? Councillor Jaglowitz.
Yes, a very simple question through you to David. Since this came forward because there was a legal opinion that our current situation was not proper, have these changes been run by our solicitor to assume to understand that these proposals will pass the test?
Mr. Pink?
Yes, the legal opinion that was received was run by our solicitor to confirm that they agreed with the interpretation of the current zoning bylaw. We have not received any legal advice or opinion on any potential changes. I think that would be more of a planning analysis and a planning process that we can go through with getting public input and go through that process. What the township solicitor reviewed was the legal opinion received, the external legal opinion on the current interpretation of our current zoning bylaw.
So supplementary, it would seem to me that that might be appropriate if we're now changing the words, and what if they're not legal? And maybe that brings up an issue that some municipalities have in-house legal counsel who are involved in these things. We don't, so we have to go outside every time and incur a cost. But anyway, I just leave that with you, that hopefully we're not implementing something that itself now would not be legal. Anyway.
Okay. Director Payne.
The zoning bylaws are constantly, they're living documents, often referred to. They're constantly evolving. And I think the municipality is fully within its rights to go through a planning exercise, to do a review of a section of its zoning bylaw, to advertise, hold a public meeting, get public input, and potentially make changes. I think it was this term of council, committee may recall, we did the exact same thing with sport courts. We identified an issue. Sport courts were permitted as of right quite close to lakes. We went through a planning process, and now they're 200-foot setback from lakes. I don't believe we need a legal opinion for the permission to make these changes. I think the appropriate thing is to get public input on them. And if committee and council feel they're appropriate changes, I think we can make those. With respect to your comments on in-house legal counsel, I think the clerk and I agree. We've talked about that regularly, about the benefit that would be. I think that's a broader budget type discussion, obviously. Obviously it's difficult to find a lawyer who can serve all the myriad of needs that we would need in-house, but I think that's a separate discussion.
But just further supplementary, just to clarify my statement that I was not suggesting we needed a legal opinion in order to make these changes. I just thought that it would be appropriate before we pass them, maybe to get a legal opinion that what we're passing will stand the test. That's what I meant. I fully understand the rights we have to do this. So you don't need to respond. That's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think we can open this up now to discussion. So Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, and through you, I've just got 2 or 3 kind of short comments. Number one, I guess one of the things that, first of all, I thought you did a terrific job with this report. This is not easy. Even on the second and third reading, it wasn't easy to necessarily comprehend and digest. So I thought you did a really good job of pitching it out. It's a real live issue, and it deserves some real live attention. One of the things that we, I suppose, could out is just simply amending our current bylaws to reflect current practice if we felt that current practice was inoffensive enough to leave alone. I think you're probably quite correct in describing some of these behaviors as a little bit overly permissive. They do need to be reviewed and looked at. We do need to understand what the implications of this kind of liberal way of interpreting the current rights of somebody who's in this situation, what their current rights are. So, I think it deserves the review we're looking at. The concern or the reality we have to understand, and you've probably heard this from me before, increasingly around the Muskoka Lakes at the township, the purchase and sale of properties is considerably less of a romantic exercise as it is a transactional exercise. People are buying and selling this stuff and flipping this stuff and making investment decisions and bets on their ability to turn them and flip them. And that needs to be recognized. Doesn't necessarily mean we have to accommodate, but there will be a lot of people who are holding these properties who made purchase decisions and pricing decisions based on a certain set of assumptions as to what they could do with property they bought. And suddenly we're going to tell them, sorry, you can't do it quite so clearly. Last 2 comments. Number one, if there's real issues because of the liberal interpretation that we need to fix, then one of the questions we have to ask is our Committee of Adjustment and the rest of our planning committee up to the task of fielding what will likely turn into dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands of applications on things that right now just go right through. And the last comment, public meeting, I think we need to be really accommodative of people's scheduling. When are they going to be here? When are they going to be available? And the real challenge will be in converting this, I don't know what it is, 2 or 3 page report that you've done into something that the average person has enough interest to wade through and can come out of it on the other side with enough knowledge to know what rights they currently think they have that are going to be put at risk. And I suspect they'll get lots of help with that from the MLA and some of the other groups, but we need to make sure that we're not talking over the heads of a lot of people who are holding the property that might be affected. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Well, hang on, I just saw it. Mayor Harding?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you wanting to circulate this now. I guess knowing that we're updating the official plan, we're going to have some zoning amendments and zoning bylaw amendments in that. Should we be doing this all together or just a little bit? I get this. You're okay to go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Were you going to speak, David? I'm sorry. Director Pink.
Thank you. Yes, I think further to Member Kelly's comments as well. I mean, certainly when I first became aware of this issue and received the legal opinions, the initial reaction is, this is a significant impact to the understanding of a large part of our community and the development community as to what the permissions are allowed. And the initial reaction was to simply resolve that. And I apologize, Member Jaglowitz, for misunderstanding your point. I agree with you. My intention would likely be to run it by a lawyer to make sure that we correct it properly this time and this doesn't happen again. So initially, and certainly one option before committee is not to necessarily make wholesale changes, but just to clarify the errors that's been discovered and continue the status quo. But I think the appropriate thing to do, and in response to Mayor Harding's question, if we're going to update the zoning bylaw and review those sections, I think we need to take a hard look at them and make sure that they are, one, in conformity with our current official plan, and are allowing the right development and prohibiting the development we don't want to see. And reviewing, knowing our official plan well, I think the changes that I'm proposing don't conflict with the current official plan. And I don't suspect that any changes in our official plan will get, in our new official plan, will get this sort of detailed and specific to be offside. But certainly I guess the third option for committee, you don't have to make any changes at this time. I did want to bring it to your attention. I'll be honest, building staff as well as planning staff and the development community are going to be quite confused with this new interpretation. It's going to take quite some time to go through each proposal to make sure whether it does comply or not anymore. So that's why I wanted to bring it sooner rather than later to correct. If we leave it for the official plan and then a zoning update, we're going to be living under the sort of interim approach for probably a couple years, which will pose some challenges again for the community as well as staff. But again, just to reiterate, we can either proceed with a more comprehensive update as I've suggested. We could just simply clean it up, which would be fairly straightforward and perhaps quicker. Or you may wish to roll it in as a broader part of the official plan review and just leave it for now. I don't think you're under any obligation to move forward in any kind of haste if you don't wish.
Thank you. Councillor Nishikawa.
Thank you. I would request that we move this forward. I don't want to wait for it to be bundled in with the OP because there's so much to absorb of the changes, and going through some of these exercises in the past, not exactly this exercise, but similar, it's a lot easier to deal with in small chunks. And I consider this a small chunk of among a whole lot more issues that we have to deal with as well. So I would just like to be moving this forward with the recommendation that we get it out to the public and start hearing from the public. Yeah, we could be getting lots of applications in. We've seen that before. Every time we make changes to 1414 or the official plan, we'll get that. And that's just the reality. I don't want to hold things up because down the road we're going to get those changes anyhow, or people requesting things. So I would just suggest that we move this forward at this time so that it could be out to the public.
Thank you. That I would agree with you. I would like to see this move forward. So I don't see anybody else with their hand up. Could I get just are we moving this forward? I can read the read the motion? Okay, moved by Councillor Roberts, seconded by Councillor Edwards. Be it resolved that Planning Committee recommend to Township Council that staff be directed to circulate updates to Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw 2014-14 as described in the November 12th, 2020 staff report for a public meeting in accordance with Planning Act requirements. Any discussion? All in favor? Good, Madam Clerk. That carries. Thank you, Mr. Pink. It was a very comprehensive report. Thank you. Okay, our next is our Heritage and Attainable Housing Committee minutes. Anyone have any comments on that? We're good, so we will accept those minutes then. No development services. Any new business? Anyone have any new business? Okay, I think we get to adjourn them. So, okay, moved by Councillor Mazan, seconded by Councillor Jaglowitz. Be it resolved that Planning Committee adjourn at 12:52 p.m. and the next regular meeting of Planning Committee be held on Thursday, December 17th, 2020 at 9 a.m. electronically from the Council Chambers, Municipal Offices in Port Carling, Ontario. All in favor? Okay, it was carried. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Have a really great weekend.